Hi again, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Annual LiDAR EFI Cross-Country Checkup. My name is Sharon Yang from the Canadian Institute of Forestry, and we are very pleased to collaborate with Philip-Edouard Shay at the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre to host this webinar. The CIF will be providing the platform and technical support for this webinar. Please note a few important house rules. During the webinar, all participants will be muted with the exception of panelists, hosts, and moderators. To share a comment or idea with all speakers and participants, please use the chat tool. You can click the chat icon in the Zoom toolbar, which is located at the bottom of your screen. A chat window will appear on the right-hand side of the screen, where you can type your message. Please post questions in the Q&A pod. A reminder that you may see a red button on the top of your Zoom screen, which indicates that the session is being recorded for archival purposes. If you run into any technical issues, please email us at electures@cififc.org or send us a private message using the Zoom chat. With that, I will now pass it over to Philip-Edouard, Forest Research Officer from the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre, who will moderate and kick off this webinar.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Here, I'll just share my screen here, make sure I get the right one. Sharing screen up there. And then demo mode. So hopefully you see my presentation and not my notes. And if so, I'll just get started. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome to the Enhanced Forest Inventory Cross-Country Checkup. It's great to have you here. My name is Philip-Edouard Shay, as we were just saying, and I'm with the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre, so part of the Canadian Forest Service. And I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Wolastoqiyik, which are governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties, so by the beautiful Wolastoq in Fredericton. And to start us off, I'll introduce you to a general idea of an EFI, so an enhanced forest inventory, so that you can all be better prepared to digest the content that's going to be delivered by our guest speakers. First of all, I put these two pictures up here on the introductory slide to remind you of the importance of a well-characterized forest inventory. So better mapping of what's on the ground can really help our operational planning and the rest of the forest value chain. So as you can imagine, if you would want to implement different silviculture treatments in these two stands, likely you'll need different equipment to do so, and you'll produce a different basket of desired products downstream. So knowing that and being able to map that for forest management planning is critical. So first of all, the one benefit of an EFI is that they're generally looking at an area-based approach, so ideally wall-to-wall. And there's still no Wikipedia pages on EFI, so sometimes there can be some confusion in the terms that we use to define tools and techniques and products. So here I have a definition from that's used by Joanne in this important 2017 information report that refers to the general LiDAR-based EFIs. So typically an EFI refers to a forest inventory that incorporates ALS, so airborne laser scanning based estimates of important forest inventory attributes. But today we're going to take an even broader perspective on EFIs, so something more along the lines that are of what's described on our NRCan website. In essence, anything that enhances the quality, accuracy, and precision of forest inventory data and produces information to a level of precision required for forest value chain optimization. So in Canada, it's also important to distinguish between our national forest inventory and our jurisdictional forest resource inventories. So the National Forest Inventory is national in scale and is used for national and international reporting and policy making. It's sample-based assessment and has a coarser scale. While forest resource inventories, also referred to as vegetation resource inventories, have finer scales needed for resource management. These focus on current conditions for forecasted timber supply and are used by government and industry for decision making. So we have kind of a statistical rigor focus and emphasis versus best information available focus. So today we're going to be looking at the forest resource inventory scale. So what do we need to enhance in our forest inventories? So generally, we want to map with more spatial detail. So provide useful insights for road planning, construction, as much as possible, be able to identify cliffs and all the minutiae in the landscape. We also want more attributes, such as species and detail. So moving from a polygon level estimates of general commercial species composition volumes to more precise individual tree characterizations, but at a large scale, so that we know exactly how many trees there are with particular economic or ecosystem values. Is this tree good for a log? Does it have good fiber? Is it good for wildlife habitat? And also there's an increasing desire to map other ecosystem characteristics like a non-commercial species, soils and carbon. There's a lot more stakeholders wanting this forest information. You also need to improve accuracy and precision, especially if you want a strategic decision that can be implemented operationally. Hence the importance of calibration and validation procedures, whether it's an internal product or something that you contracted out. But what is precise enough, right? What's needed to maintain this accuracy and precision over time? Because all these enhancements come at a cost. So it's a balancing act. The more you improve and have more attributes, maybe it'll take longer to turn over and update your EFI. It'll cost more. Maybe it'll be less user friendly because there'll be so many different elements. The workflow gets complex. More information and data that you need to manage. And today I'm going to be highlighting a bit of the human resources aspects of these EFIs, which is critical. So we need to have access essentially to a multidisciplinary basket of expertise to build an EFI. So I'll run you through a general example based on this workflow for a LiDAR-based EFI. But first, it's important to note that you need a plan. So EFIs come in many different flavors and different pipelines. Some are still in operational research, while others are operational and repeatable pipelines. So in order to ensure that you have timely delivery of useful data, you'll need to know what expertise you need and where you need them and when to deploy them. So make sure that you have a clear objective of what your EFI is trying to do. What technology you'll need to accomplish this, or that it's available to do that, and how you plan on doing so. What's your data processing pipeline and quality control measures that you'll have along the way, and how are you going to try to schedule all these activities so you can get the data and information at the right time. And so once you understand this, then you'll be better prepared to figure out, are we going to do this in-house or contract out various sections of the whole process. And each step is under continuous improvement, and so it can be intimidating to start out or to improve your EFI. But remember that these are multidisciplinary endeavors. So ask for help. And some people spend their whole careers working on one of these steps. So the first thing that you need is a large-scale, high-resolution data. So in this case, let's say an airborne laser scanning data set. You might have your own pilot and team of engineers and sensor-equipped plane or UAV in this case, where we can see our drone pilot here, Oliver. But if you don't, then you might need to refer to a procurement officer with remote sensing expertise that can help you acquire this imagery. And here I put up a federal guidelines on LiDAR data acquisition that can also help guide that process. You also likely need a remote sensing specialist to then process this data and generate LiDAR metrics, and your digital elevation model, your canopy height model, and so on. And so this LiDAR book and the LiDAR R package from Russell can really help get started. So you're also going to be able to need to digest and store large data sets, and these might be reoccurring. So consider hiring the services of a database architect or a data scientist in order to make sure that your data is going to be findable and usable in the short, but also the long term. What will need to be archived, and how much storage will you need, and where will it be placed? So the second part of your EFI is that you often need other wall-to-wall products, which further reinforces the need for your database and data flow specialist. So these ancillary data sets can be environmental in nature, so soils, geology, topography, climate. Some are satellite imagery, global in scale or more localized. And there's always new products coming online. So here I put the link to the Google Earth Engine data catalog, which can be a good starting point to get yourself familiarized with accessible, harmonized imagery and other satellite data sets that you can start playing with. To use and to make sense out of these large data sets, you'll likely need support You'll likely need support from our GIS specialists or climatologists or other sort of subject matter expert to generate or produce these products, or even just to use them. And so before committing to using one of these ancillary data sets in your EFI, make sure to ask yourself, what is the stability of this product over time? You know, will you need to update it or grow this product to when you're going to be renewing your inventory? And then also, is it a good predictor of forest attributes? So a priori reasoning can ensure that your model generation is founded on sound science and logic, and that you're not just throwing everything at the model to see what comes out. So a fun new development actually from the federal side is that we have our weather generator biosims that's now available as an API in our package. So I have the links here. So you can feel free to generate spatially explicit climate data historically or forecast it forward if you need to do so. So now we're going to then move on to our ground truths, because we're trying to tie ground truth to remote sensing data in order to develop our spatially explicit attributes at a large scale. And before you can send people out into the field, you need a sampling design. So here I have listed the SGS-R package, which is again open source R package that help structurally guide your sampling based on what your needs are. So once you have a sampling strategy, then you'll have to go collect the samples. So you need a field crew that maybe a forester, a soil scientist, an ecologist, or machine operators that can help you get access to the data that you need to build your EFI and your ground truths. And all of these will need proper geo positioning. So pick tools with the right accuracy that you'll need for your desired outcome. And then once you have your field samples, you'll bring some back to the lab, and you might need the help and support from lab technicians, dendrochronologists or chemists to process and extract the available data from those samples. Once you finally have all your data tabulated, data set, then you'll need to compile the data. So maybe seeking the help from a computer programmer with growth and yield modeling expertise, so that you may need to grow your forest or your measurements forward or backwards in order to align your ground truth measurements with the timing of your LiDAR or remote sensing image acquisition time. And then once you have these two data sets of ground truths and your remote sensing wall-to-wall data sets, then you'll need to develop your training data set that's ready for model development. So it's critical to annotate and label these properly. So again, your GIS or remote sensing specialists can really help doing this. And this is essentially cropping out the point clouds or other wall-to-wall products to the extent of the ground truth measurements, overlaying these data sets to make sure that they align carefully, and this requires proper orthorectification and geographic positioning. And making these training data sets is extremely costly. So think about how to make these reusable, shareable, and interoperable as much as possible. So then you proceed to develop your model, area-based model, whether parametric or non-parametric. So you might need a computer programmer or an AI specialist for more complex models to develop these relationships. And we're always trying to build the model with the least number of predictors as possible, so that it can be as simple as to implement and reproducible. And obviously, we'll have to validate the model, so a statistician can help define the training, testing, and validation data sets that are required in our model building. And IT support is kind of crucial at this step, because we're dealing with larger and larger volumes of data. So setting up an infrastructure to be able to process all this can be necessary. And then the last step, so we apply our model to wall-to-wall metrics, for example, by plot matching pixels or areas associated with ground truths and with those outside of the scope of ground calibration. So an AI specialist, computer programmers, and GIS remote sensing specialists are used. And then the large area of interest can require substantial computing power and data management. So again, we have our data scientists and IT support and so on that can come into play. And then you need to further validate your final product at this point to ensure that your model is applied reasonably. So essentially, you need to confirm that your ground sampling layout was representative and non-biased. So you'll maybe need to require further help from that statistician or consult your subject matter experts to make sure that your product makes sense. Maybe sending a field crew back in the field to make sure that the measurements were right. And then finally, you have your product that you can then redraw your stand level boundary if needed and summarize your new attributes at the polygon of interest. And so by the time you're finished your EFI product, it might already be time to update it. Do you want to do this again? Do you start from scratch? Do you update it? These are all important questions to consider. And I'll just say that the lines are being blurred between strategic, tactical, and operational inventory needs for decision making. So can you identify synergies across these various scales of forest management, removing duplications and trying to streamline that process? So building an EFI can be intimidating, and I see Canada a bit of a microcosm of the worldwide remote sensing technology adoption that's described in this paper down here. And each province has their own traditions and way of doing things. And often we use a mantra of if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. So proposing a new approach can be challenging or even risky. And obviously there's different complexities of forest structures and compositions across the countries and between provinces and territories, which make adoption of a new tool maybe more complex or easier to implement. And the availability of technology and expertise and data across the country differs as well. You know, there might be more information near urban centers and or where forests make up an important component of the local economy. Costs also differ. You know, to access certain terrain, it might be cost prohibitive either from the ground or impossible from above. And then we have different policies and land ownership structures and relationships between local expertise such as research facilities and industry. And so all these things influence the readiness and willingness to adopt new technology. So my final message to users and all of you is, you know, to users and administrators, remember that EFIs are the product of multidisciplinary collaborations. And EFIs can be complicated and require many different skills to develop and implement. So ask for support and help, or provide that help and support if you're an administrator. Forestry can no longer be, or rarely be done by one sole forester these days. To tech developers and scientists, work directly with industry, provinces, and territories to really understand their unique limitations and challenges, so that we produce solutions that suit their end user needs. And then on the map validation and accuracy side, you know, find ways to quantify uncertainty and map it out. And please share your methods, your pipeline documentation and scripts, and make these share these, make them available on our packages on GitHub or, you know, and other sharing platforms. So custom solutions will be needed across Canada, but sharing information and technological developments could benefit us all. So with that, special thank you to all our speakers for agreeing to share their knowledge and insights and make this event possible. I hope that you'll, without any further ado, I'll give the stage to Matt with an EFI update from PEI.
Thank you, Pez. Let me share. That was a great start, Pez. Thank you. Really explored, how many different aspects there are to a product like this. So yes, all right. Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Matt Angus, Forest Inventory Analyst here on PEI with the PEI Department of Environment, Energy and Climate Action in Charlottetown. Got a brief update for everyone today on our EFI product as a province, as well as some other work we're doing that's been occupying us for the past year or more. I presented this before as kind of a timeline of our recent inventory updates here in the province. 2020 was our decadal inventory report year. So we collected all of our data in 2020 and 2021, including aerial photography and high-resolution LiDAR. We were able to use those with a third-party contractor to develop an EFI that was delivered March 2022. And then later that year, we were hit with a fairly damaging storm, windstorm, post-tropical storm Fiona came through in September. So that really changed a lot of the values that we had just developed. that whole time I've been analyzing and reporting and writing the report. So I kind of put aside the noise of Fiona to barrel through and got my State of the Forest report released for the province. It's available online now. That was back in December. And then we quickly changed our focus back to try to quantify and look at some analysis on what type of storm damage we can see. So I'll try to focus on that for a little bit. We don't have a very large EFI update, so I'm going to just see what we can talk about the storm here for a moment. So yeah, September 22nd, 2022, Category 2 level winds whipped through the Atlantic provinces, caused lots of damage to all infrastructure, including forests. Got a quick photo from the CBC here. Nothing we haven't seen before, but very damaging in this case, worst that we've seen here in many decades, if not ever. A drone shot here of a plantation completely flattened. Lots of this across the landscape. So before the power was even on, we were getting questions on how bad was the damage out there. What can we see? So we had 2020 imagery, but we quickly started the ball rolling on acquiring satellite imagery of the entire province again, post-storm. So we've got a tasking window, October to December. And I show the photo here just to highlight the variation in these images. That proved to be a difficulty for us with the satellite imagery, is just the variation in, it's not, the time frame's not all that different, just a couple of months, but light angles and snow cover and leaf off conditions really varied from across the province. So once we finally did acquire the images, up to 6 to 10 months later, after the storm, we just had to decide what we were going to do with them. So we tossed around the idea of some change detection between these images and our 2020 images to find spots of forest that didn't look the same. But unfortunately, the image quality and image specs were too different between our 2020 aerial photography and these satellites for us to be able to do that. So we went with a focus on these images and do an object-based analysis with some training data. So this is a pretty basic workflow for this type of work. We sharpen up the images and clean them up a little bit. And then we pan around and we pick hundreds and hundreds of training samples. Here's some spots of blowdown. Here's some spots of standing trees. Here's some spots of wetland. Here's some spots of maybe a clear cut. Put those all in, and it does delineate patches. We go through those manually and pick ones that don't make sense and try it all again. So we were under some pretty heavy pressure time-wise to get a product out, which we were able to do quite quickly, available online with a web map product there. We aren't able to share the satellite images themselves due to contract issues, but it's all been made into PDFs that look pretty good on there. Here's a quick photo of that first result that we posted online. So we can see green is our forest outline and red is what the model predicted as wind affected. That's the term that we're using. It's not straight blowdown. It could be some leaning trees. It could be some broken tops, really anything affected by the wind. And we can see this focused in our kind of northeast section of the province there. This photo also highlights the variation in quality of the images is straight depicted in the quality of the output, where we can see some pretty harsh straight lines between images. So our next steps with that is that we are going to continually manually refining those. So I've been doing that on an attribute-based method. So finding polygons and finding areas where maybe the trees simply weren't tall enough to blow over and the model incorrectly predicted that. Or it's also picking up 2 years worth of actual harvest between 2020 and 2022 that we wouldn't have had before. So I'm trying to find all of those manually. So we're picking away at that. And once we finally decide on our final wind affected areas product, we plan to apply our forest attributes that we had in 2020 to those, update the inventory data if needed, knock those ages back or adjust the species composition as we see fit. And further to that is finally going to able to leverage our EFI data to estimate wood supply impacts as well as carbon impacts on these areas. So if we have a large area that we deemed affected by the wind or blown down, we can adjust our wood supply models to incorporate that. That's the plan with our EFI data. And this is also going to roll into an update to our State of the Forest report. Hopefully this spring we'll be able to process some of this data. So that brings us quickly to our EFI. So people that may have tuned in years before, PEI does have a full provincial coverage, wall-to-wall, 2,600 kilometers squared of our forest, 7.2 million data points of 400 square meters each, and we've got a whole list of attributes here that it includes. For our wind-affected stuff, we're really going to be focusing on the gross total volume, trees per hectare, maybe basal area that we'll be very interested in. But this is what we all have now, and so we're not really using the EFI on an operational basis as of now. It's kind of been sitting on the shelf as a product that we have, but I will say that it's really changed the way I look at our forest from my desk. It's just one way I've symbolized it here in our Pro. The squares are all the 400 square meters size, and I just have it symbolized by volume. So I can see at a glance areas of high volume, low volume, that kind of thing. So while this is the desktop version, we do also have this available for our field staff across the province in their pocket on their smartphone through Esri Field Apps. For the first time, they can have EFI data at their fingertips, which really lets us get past traditional stand boundaries and all kinds of new avenues for us there. So we're still working on how best to use the EFI for us, but we're starting some very long-term management plans on our provincial forest, of which this EFI data will be a big contributor. We'll also be looking at how it can help grow our growth and yield department. Anyway, we're very happy with the product as it is. The gross volume seems to be very accurate from what we can see so far, so we're very happy with that. And after hearing Pez's initial explanation there and explaining the complexity of a product like this, it really reflects back, and I feel fairly fortunate to be able to have this at my fingertips on a daily basis. Because we collected all the inventory data. It was kind of data that we would do anyway. So to be able to turn that into a brand new product like this has been really exciting for us. And that's my update for today. I'll take any questions people have on that, and I've got 2 links here to what I mentioned before, as well as my email at the bottom if there's any follow-up stuff.
Okay. Well, thank you for that presentation. I believe we have question. I don't know if this question was from Doug, was directed to you in particular, Matt. We have how do practitioners like the no stand boundary paradigm? Does it confuse them in terms of marking descriptions or designing field surveys? So,
well, I can try to do a quick question on that one. It is an interesting one, and it's definitely a paradigm shift, as you said. PEI is very privately owned and very small and fragmented. So our stand boundaries are often property boundaries. So we haven't fully gotten away from our traditional stand boundaries yet. And, we don't have species in our EFI inventory. So we're still doing our stand delineation species wise. So we haven't really fully gotten away from it yet. Let's see. Okay, do you want to
Yeah, I can read them for you if you want to focus on just answering them. But if so here we have a question from Wawang. Hopefully I pronounced that properly. But is there a plan to release the EFI ground plot and or LiDAR data available to the public? Thanks a lot.
I believe our LiDAR data is available to the public for a very small fee, per hectare fee. Our 2020 corporate land use inventory and full forest inventory is available for research purposes free of charge to private industry. Again, has a small fee attached. Ground plot data, no plans to release that to the public as it were at the moment. And EFI data for individual landowners, they can access EFI data on their property that we have. And as far as research purposes, I think data sharing agreements for that EFI data are easily arranged. We'd love to get it out there.
Awesome, thanks. And then Robert has a couple questions here. So what is the total size of your inventory and how are you determining and updating species composition in your inventory?
So our forest on PEI is 258,000 hectares. So our inventory includes every hectare of that. And how are we determining and updating species composition for the inventory? Well, in 2020, it was still photo interpreted. How are we going to update it with the wind affected areas is a fantastic question. It's going to be not quite sure. We're going to have to look at some transition effects on the type of forests that were affected, what we expect to come back there. You know, it is a year and a half later, so coming this field season will be a great time to go see what is coming back. In a couple test sites, we can do our regen survey like that. And but otherwise, it'll be kind of just a distribution amongst the whole province again. I think if we do any follow-up modeling, it'll be kind of making some fairly large assumptions on what's coming back.
Okay, we have time for another question here from Uliana. Sorry about if I'm not pronouncing that right, but good morning. How is the inventory of trees with a creeping trunk, such as Pinus mugo, carried out? So
I'm not quite sure I understand that one. Does that grow sideways? Is that kind of it? And maybe they are thinking that our object-based image analysis may be picking up leaning trees like that as wind affected, which is quite possible. It's definitely not a perfect model. It's missing spots that we know blew down for sure, and catching spots that, you know, just had the leaves blown off, and now it looks a little bit different than it did. So we're still trying to fix it up like that. And again, we'll be looking at it kind of at a landscape type scale as opposed to a really close up stand specific scale. So all of these kind of overestimates, underestimates are hopefully going to balance out a little bit.
Yeah, so your windblown model was done by a training data set that was remotely sensed, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Sorry, the training data set was like manual, like we clicked around.
Exactly.
But it was all just on those various quality satellite images.
Yeah.
And very few of them were of very good quality.
Yeah, somewhere we need to work on, yes, technology-wise. Well, thank you.
Aerial photography is still king for us. If we could do it again.
Thank you. I think you responded to his question properly. Thanks, Matt, for that great update. And I think we'll be ready to move on to Quebec with Maxime.
All right.
If you start sharing your screen, then we'll pass it on to the next.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to share my screen. Perfect. There you go. Is everything good?
Yeah, perfectly.
Good. So this is the Quebec update for the annual LiDAR EFI Cross-Country Checkup. Today I'm going to talk about 3 different things, which are our dendrometric LiDAR maps, our estimation of the forest biomass and carbon, and finally, the way we characterize and digitalize our road network by using a LiDAR data. So dendrometric LiDAR map. The objective by offering this map is to support operational planning for forest activity wherever forest cover is likely to contain merchantable stems. The output is a vector map that enable estimation for forest attribute at a fine scale. Our approach is based on recent LiDAR survey, and is also based on relationship between the dendrometric variable of sample plots and the variable dominant height and canopy density. The creation of this map do not require the use of recent forest inventory. So how is this working? First, we need to do a input preparation. We combine data from LiDAR or eco-forestry map and from height growth model to create a matrix data of 10-meter resolution. This matrix contains information like canopy density, dominant height, mean height, and altitude from DTM and contextual data. From those three information, so dominant height, mean height, and altitude, combined with synchronous plot with LiDAR, we are able to create a relative density index that is incorporated into our matrix data. From then, we are able also to create a polygon based on dominant height and canopy density. The matrix data and the polygons are important for the next step. Model creation and mapping of forest attribute. So from tariff for usable growth volume cubic measurement and from our 48,000 historical sample plots, we are able to create 18 forest attribute models. These combined with our matrix data, we are able to make prediction for forest attribute. This gave us 86 dendrometric variables. The final step, we integrate our prediction into the polygon that we have created, and this gave us our dendrometric map. The table contains polygon, and in those polygon, we have 93 compiled variables, such as standard volume, distribution by species or species group, height, canopy density, merchantable basal area, number of merchantable stems, average diameter, and volume per stems. It also have points that have 11 meta variables. Those are like when does the LiDAR was required, which tools that have been used. The product is only available in the northern part of our manageable forest. This type of forest is more easy to model, contain only softwoods. Right now, we're trying to do the modelization on the southern part for hardwood and mixed forest. This product is really great because there's now variation information within our eco-forestry stand. So as you can see, this is our stands, and there is like various variation of different information within those stands. Second part of my presentation, estimation of forest biomass and carbon. This is a database that display biomass by dry tons per hectare and carbon contained by tons per hectare of live trees above ground, excluding roots. For productive eco-forestry stand measuring 7 meters or more in height. So this is not a database stand alone. It requires to be linked for polygonal entity from the eco-forestry map. The first step is to convert data from our plots to biomass. We're using regionalized NFI equation, which is the equivalent of the national equation by Lambert 2005. Then we separate the trunk and the bark into 3 parts, which is the stump, marchable part, and the crown of softwood by using taper equation and allometric relationship. This gave us value by parts of the tree. The aim of this is to take practical consideration of the forest operation. And then we convert our biomass information of the different parts of the tree into carbon contained. We are using a conversion factor. Normally it's one conversion, but now we are using four different factors for 4 different parts of the tree, which is the bark of hardwood and softwood, and other parts of hardwood tissue and softwood tissue. Our factors can vary from 0.47 to 0.53. Then we apply KNN method to inputting values to stands on eco-forestry map for the 4th inventory and all combined territory for the 5th inventory. Because in the middle of the 4th inventory, we switched to KNN and we did KNN for all the 5th inventory. New results can be generated annually for the territories benefiting for update forest compilation. So a table example. As you can see, the table is divided in 3 parts. The first part is all the wood parts that are extract from forest with in forestry. The second part is the residual part of the trees that we leave on sites, and the third part is the non-commercial species stump and sampling. This is 12 variables for biomass. We also have 12 other variables for carbon. That is presented the same way as biomass variable. To put that in another perspective, this is what it looks like with images. So we have merchantable size stem, which is DBH more than 9.1 centimeter. We can divide this into commercial species that are softwood and hardwood. We take the mentionable parts of the trunk, which is wood and bark. We differentiated that with branch plus non-marchable part of the trunk for softwood and branches for hardwood. We also differentiate the foliage and the stumps. For the non-commercial species, the total minus the stumps equal the trunk plus bark plus branch plus foliage. It is also the same with the sampling and all species. So the total is the total above ground of biomass, including stumps of live trees, including poles per hectare. Moving on to the last part of my presentation, characterization and digitization of the road network using LiDAR data. We use two R package for that. One is ALS Road and the other is VecNet. ALS Road the development of ALS Road began in 2009. The purpose is to give assistance in characterization access path for ground survey work. It helped us to enhance our point cloud classification. It is also a potential improvement for our router. Router is our provincial network for our provincial network for all the roads that we have in Quebec. So once ALS Road was made, the VecNet was the continuation of ALS Road. If you're interested, here's two paper that was published, and I also gave you the GitHub links for both of the R package. So the difference between these two packages, ALS Road, you need to have vectors to be analyzed, and VecNet is you have to give them a starting point, and it will try to find the roads. So VecNet explore an incomplete network. So ALS Road, this R package use trying to search the least cost path between point A and point B using conductivity matrix based solely on matrix derived from airborne LiDAR. So this is a different approach for path recognition. It should be mentioned that we're not starting from nothing. We start from a database that contains path. So basically the algorithm analyzes section of 10 meters of a vector. It merge every point cloud data from LiDAR. And then it can extract different metrics such as the drivable width, the road width, etc. So, like I said, it extracts different metrics such as roughness, canopy height model, density ground plot, and intensity range. By combining different thresholds of these different matrix, it can produce a conductivity layers, as you can see over here. And then once you have that layer, you can try the algorithm try to find the least path cost. So is this in this example, this is the layer in red that router have, and in green this is the algorithm find. So the product generated is updating geometry if it's possible. It gave us main attributes such as average width of the road surface, average width of the path. It also gave us a general score that's going to 100 to 0 to 100, representing the ease with which the algorithm was able to generate routes. So this general score can be classed between 0 to 4. 0, it means unanalyzed path. 1 means path found with high confidence in reposition. And 4, it goes up to 4, which is path not found and not repositioned. We tested this on 2 different sites. One site was at La Forêt-Montmorency, and the other one was at Zec-la-Blanche, Jet de la Rivière-Blanche. The difference between those sites is one is more managed than the other. So as you can see, Forêt-Montmorency seems to be more managed. There's a lot of green on this map. And I just wanted to show you how the output looks like. So as you can see, it characterized very well the roads that we provide them, but ALS, like I said, didn't find new paths. So this, if you can see, there is a road, but it was not in the initial database, so it didn't characterize it. Another example is this one. This is a great example to see that the algorithm analyze all the section. So if you have a good road path at the beginning, but the rest is very bad, it would automatically give a bad path for all the road. Then moving on to ZEC de la Rivière Blanche, as you can see, this is a less managed part of forest compared to La Forêt Montmorency. As you can see over here, there's a road that was built after the photo, but with the LiDAR acquisition, we can see there was probably a road over there. So the algorithm used only LiDAR data, so it found and characterized this road. Here's another example. There seems to be a lot of road. The roads seems to be closed, and with the algorithm, you can see that there is some. And like I said, the algorithm analyze section by section, so you can have a yellow algorithm, a yellow sector, and then a green one, and then a red one at the end. So analyzes by vector. Here's another example of road closed for a long time. The current limits of this approach is it cannot characterize and correct road visible on a LiDAR, but absent from the original vector layer. It cannot characterize or correct road present in the original vector layer, but subsequent to the LiDAR acquisition. It also have a geographical feature, sometimes difficulty to manage properly, such as a short segment, loop, parallel watercourse, hairpin turns, and parallel roads. So for your information, Ontario is using the same approach, but with a single photon LiDAR. And the last one, VectorNet. This is from a starting point, it will try to explore, navigate, or on a conductivity probability matrix. So if the algorithm starts over here, finds an intersection, it will take a break and research and continue this path. And once he went to the end of the road, come back and start exploring. So he continues his investigation. So for example, this is a VectorNet conductivity matrix compared to an orthophotography. And this is what the vector were found compared to what the data we have from AccuRéseau Plus. So it is extremely similar, but sometimes cannot find some types of road, and we also found that it's very difficult to find the end of some of the roads. I hope this marked the end of our presentation. I hope you appreciate it. If you have any question, I marked down my email address at the end of the presentation. I didn't work on all these things that I present you today, but you can email me and I'll put you in a contact with the right person in my organization to answer your question.
Wow, thank you, Maxime. That's really insightful. I really appreciate the update from Quebec. And we already have a couple questions here for you, if you're ready.
Yeah.
So the initial inventory you showed was yeah, question from Jeffrey. The initial inventory you showed was the modeling approach that for that also was the modeling approach also that KNN, like the biomass, and how did you approach the validation of that product?
The dendrometric map is only regression approach, and the validation that we made was made by visiting pre-harvest sites. So we compare our data from before harvest and after harvest.
Nice. And just were you able to quantify that validation across your whole product, or?
Not across all product, but I think we did 38 inventory sites.
Okay, great. And then our second question here is, in your experience, how does ALS roads perform under canopy roads? So maybe a road that's under even deciduous canopy, right, where it goes over.
Yeah. I think it can recognize part of the canopy and underneath because but this package was made with our low intensity LiDAR. So in some parts it's doing well, some parts is doing bad.
So a higher point cloud density would have more results from the ground, and that might help it detect more road? Okay.
Yeah. But right now we're testing this approach on a bigger scale, and we're trying to figure it out which thresholds would represent some types of road. So yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I think that
Yeah.
answered the question. Okay, well, we really appreciate you. And as you said, your email's in the presentation. So this recording will be shared with, after when we're done. And so we can put you in contact with put people in contact with you when if they have further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bez.
Okay, so we'll move on to now the Ontario update with Ian. So whenever you're ready, Ian, you can share your screen and take over.
Sure. Share screen. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's all good.
So thanks for the opportunity to present, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone that's joined us this afternoon and this morning. So great opportunity to share some of the updates that are going on in Ontario. We're going to focus kind of mainly on LiDAR today, but and T2 inventory aspects, but we've got some good updates to share with everyone. So we're still continuing on with our journey with single photon data collection. So we'll provide some updates on where we are in terms of acquiring the managed area in Ontario that consists of 455,000 square kilometers of area to fly. Provide an update and overview on our integrated vegetation sampling plot network, our LiDAR inventory production process, and how we're kind of coping with the large volumes of data that we have from the production standpoint and also from a data access standpoint. So we'll get started. So the general background of the T2 inventory production process is mainly to acquire, the first steps are to acquire data. So we're acquiring single photon LiDAR that averages in point density between 25 and 30 points per meter. We're collecting field plot data that uses a fixed area plot radius of 11.28 meters, which gives us 400 square meters of measurement. That data is being collected on a digital app, and we're having those results uploaded and interacted within our cloud environment, and it's provides some digital monitoring and updates on progress and so forth from a contract management standpoint. Once we've collected the data, there's some modeling that occurs. So the area-based approach is the primary inventory application that we're using the LiDAR data with. We do use it with some structural components that Margaret will talk about later on in today's session, with the goal to produce the predicted attributes that you see in a typical ABA-based inventory approach. And then to summarize those inventory attributes at the polygon level. So we still have a policy framework requirement of polygons, and so we will summarize those LiDAR rasters at the polygon level, but also provide those rasters as a kind of a deeper dive, higher resolution product to support kind of that tactical and operational planning levels that may want to look at a higher degree of detail. Oops. So for the LiDAR capture, even despite all the smoke that we had last summer, we were able to get close to 80,000 square kilometers flown later in the summer into the early fall period. So we did manage to get some progress on acquisition. So we're currently sitting at about 26 forest management units, and that puts us at about 400,000 square kilometers of single photon data that we've acquired now in Ontario. So it's getting close to getting closer to being fully acquired, our project area, which is nice to see. On the vegetation sampling network side, this has been structurally guided by our LiDAR data products. So we're using a principal components analysis to more or less let the LiDAR data drive, where we're going to conduct our field plot samples to support our modeling. And within that, there's a nested plot arrangement that consists of what we call our A, B, and C plots, and we'll go through those in detail here in a few minutes. We're using tools such as SGSR, as well as the VSN app that was developed to support the collection of field plot data, and that's been tweaked to be able to communicate with our cloud environment so that we can consume data from the vendor in the cloud and be able to kind of integrate updates. So vendors with Starlink access or internet access can provide updates back to the plot database, and we can reissue remeasurement plots or revisit plots if there's access concerns back out through that type of network. So progress to date is 15 units with potentially another 13 that were put out for tender for 2024. So we're starting to hit the main production levels of our field plot program over the next few years. Within the field plot component, so it's a circular plot, 400 square meters. Mensuration aspects are kind of typical to our PGP plots in Ontario. So we're collecting species, diameter, breast height, live dead, in and out, whether the trees are in or out. Heights, we've been measuring and measuring every second tree and ocular estimates on the others. Ecosite, age are collected, and this is all kind of contingent on really good sub-meter GPS position. So we really strive to try to get as close as we can to the best available GPS location for each plot, as that's kind of critical in the modeling component is being within a few meters of where we need to be, rather than plus or minus 5 or more meters, which starts to push you out of the certain types of conditions that you're trying to apply your field plot models, or your field plot data to your modeling. So within the VSN design, we've got the A module, which primarily supports our area-based approach, and this makes up the larger portion of our plots that are distributed on each forest management unit. Then within that, we typically have a smaller subsection, which are B plots. So these include the nested aspects of the ABA components of an A module, but also include stem mapping for the trees that are measured in that B plot. And then the C plot contains the nested A and B plots, and then also includes some aspects for broad scale monitoring. So A and Bs have been scaled back at the present time to a soil auger, but our C plots are still using a soil pit and downwoody debris surveys, and herbaceous plants are part of that C plot module. And those C plot modules, we're integrating some of our existing permanent sample plots into remeasurement plots if we can make them work in the sample design. So the sample design, relying upon the LiDAR, gives us millions of candidate cells to sample in a evenly structured plot design. So essentially we're able to stratify access a little bit better. So we're not necessarily having to look for specific conditions with a photo interpreter across the entire forest. We're able to find strata conditions more or less across the forest unit, and typically find them within drivable roads, which is a real help on trying to make field sampling more efficient. So typically these plots, we can locate them 30 to 300 meters of decent truck access points, which is help with field productivity levels in terms of collecting the data that we need. On the forest inventory progress front, we have 4 forests that we produced draft ABA metrics through our knowledge tech transfer development program, and we're working on a 5th forest right now, which is kind of framing the forest resource inventory technical specification. So once we're finished that forest, we'll have a draft tech spec that will guide more or less the process and the deliverables of the final forest inventory model that we'll be rolling out for Ontario. So that's on the horizon for kind of the spring summer period. And a lot of this work is we kind of, if you tuned in last year, you would have seen, the development of some of these tools in the Azure and Databricks environment. Recently we've started to move a number of these tools over to what we call our prod, or our final environment, where they'll roll into production. So we're still continuing on with a lot of the pipelines and coding work that was highlighted last year, which includes storing the data in Azure, in the Azure cloud environment. We're leveraging Databricks to do parallel processing, and in order to support some of that, we've been using languages like PDAL, and some of the conventional tools that people rely upon in R, like LiDAR, and R packages that can run in that Databricks environment and allow for the parallel processing to occur. And what this has kind of resulted in is shaving weeks of processing time off of LiDAR metrics, and running large processes to run in a matter of days rather than weeks. So it's been a huge improvement in terms of productivity and data processing on our side. And that's more or less how we've kind of figured out how to manage the large volume of data that we have for the SPL data set, because it currently sits at about 500 terabytes of data that we have to manage. Within that PDAL environment, we've compressed a lot of our data to COPSI-LAS, in kind of in alignment with some of the other jurisdictions. So NRCan, with their HRDEM project, has started to release a number of their LiDAR products through the COPSI-LAS format, and so is the USDA. So this format is kind of unique in the sense that it allows you to download the data, but also allows you to stream the data and reduce kind of data consumption and data storage aspects if you're set up to be able to do the streaming. So the architecture kind of still looks like this, similar to what we presented last year, but we've got inputs coming in from our field plot LiDAR vendors, and those come into an ingest zone where we're able to run the general QA/QC, deploy audits, for field and so forth if needs be. That data gets processed into, say, compressed COPSI-LAS files from the last file it's delivered in, and then it gets, produced into kind of enriched products that are, are further processed components, say like LiDAR metrics, where we've, started to run statistics on the LiDAR data. And then we've got our curated data products that, we start to be able to publish things that are available to go out to, say, GeoHub. And GeoHub's kind of our public-facing download service that folks can download information. So a lot of our LiDAR products are available through our Ontario GeoHub and can be downloaded on a tile-by-tile basis or scripted into a larger data download. And on the back end, a lot of this data, kind of evolves in Delta Lakes, and like I said, we're doing a lot of the processing in our Databricks environment to leverage the parallel processing of the cloud. And this allows us to kind of streamline and make data available to a number of our folks involved in the inventory process. So data scientists, data engineers are part of, the design that we've implemented here. So we've got, folks within the government, folks within our government LRC, our local IT cluster that kind of support us on architecture design. And we've also, brought in external help from folks on the Databricks and Microsoft side to help us get through the implementation of this project. So data access is currently primarily for download is available through the GeoHub. So the link's up there at the top, and you can see the progress screen here. And as you zoom in, you'll get to the tile level, and then you're able to click and download whatever tiles you want to be able to consume. We do have some WCS and WMS services that are available through this link at the bottom to be able to look at our LiDAR derivatives and stream those into either QGIS or ARC or those types of platforms. And then there's aerial imagery affiliated with the T1, so our previous cycle of inventory, as well as our T2, some of our T2 data sets are loaded in there. There's a few that are missing yet, but hopefully they get added shortly. So that kind of brings us to the end of where we are in terms of production. Like I say, we've kind of moved a lot of stuff to prod, did a lot of testing to get it from development stage to prod. And really what prod means is, we've got a secure environment that, will allow us to, roll through automated processes that have been tested and are ready to be implemented and supported by like a full-scale IT department. So on the back end, like our cybersecurity and all those kind of pieces that need to be, looked at from a corporate IT model are applied in that production model. So if there's any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or even reach out through the email here that's listed on the final slide. So I'd just like to thank everyone.
Well, congratulations, Ian. It seems like you've made a lot of progress and making it closer to that finish line of seeing that whole management unit, well, all those management unit areas totally mapped. It's quite a feat. So yeah, we do have a couple questions already. So the first one, if you're ready, is was there any comparison between models built on linear mode LiDAR versus the new single photon LiDAR models?
Yeah, we have, if you go to that GeoHub site, I think there's a paper linked that Joanne White was part of and Murray Woods to do some comparisons of linear mode and SPL and just try to understand the general similarities and differences that exist between the two types of LiDAR technologies. So that paper is available there, and if it's not, then just send an email to this, send a request to this email, and we'll forward you the paper.
Awesome. And then another question from Jeffrey is, what GNSS hardware and correction approach are you using for your ground plot surveys? Yeah, so there's been a bit of kind of one device that's kind of surfaced, and the EOS Arrow has kind of been one of the ones that that's been kind of a well-performing unit under variable canopy conditions. So that would probably be one of the top picks in terms of technology. Well, thanks for the insights. And then a question from Branko. What tools are you using for treetop location?
Yeah, so we've got a couple different approaches that we're looking at. We've got you know, a tree crown counting approach, and we've also been working on a multi crown segmentation. So we're looking at, you know, different crowns at different positions in the canopy, and using that as a detection method to you know, try to validate some of our LiDAR crowns to our stem map tree plots, so that we can compare tree counts of, and it seems to work fairly well in the dom and co-dom. The suppressed and isolated trees, you know, in the understory are a little bit more sporadic in terms of getting alignment, but it's been a really interesting way to be able to look at some of the height comparisons of our stem map plots.
So Jeffrey has a follow-up, and he's asking if your EOS Aero units are dual frequency, and if you're doing the differential correction or PPP against the GNSS.
Yeah, so yeah, I think we're doing I believe they're dual frequency. I'd have to check on the processing that they're using, but it's more or less we have them delivered to a specification. So we can circle back on that if you want.
Yeah, so Jeffrey, if you want some further clarifications, maybe just write an email and then you know, dig deep.
We can follow up on that. Yeah.
And then another question here is Ontario land cover compilation data available for previous years. The 2023 version is available currently.
Sorry, land cover or inventory?
Ontario land cover compilation data. So I guess the whole inventory maybe? Or...
Yeah, like the inventory can, you know, is part of the land cover, but we do have like previous rounds of T1 inventory are available through the GeoHub, and there is land cover data. There should be land cover data available through the GeoHub as well.
Okay, awesome. And I have a quick question for you. Since you're dealing with large data sets, you know, you're talking about parallel processing. And you're distributing it, I guess, in tile format. But what are you breaking it? What size of the units are you breaking it down to for your parallel processing?
Yeah, so it gets broken down, like it's essentially tiles, and it's trying to feed through multiple processes. So, you know, depending on the process, we can define the compute and the amount of RAM that can be assigned to those particular processes. So, you know, it can exceed up to, you know, 70 cores and you know, hundreds of gigs of RAM if needs be to you know, meet certain tasks. So some of it is kind of process optimized compute that's been built. So not every process uses the exact same compute configuration.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for the clarification, and thank you for all the information. You're off the hook for now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
So our next speaker will be Lane, coming in from Saskatchewan with a provincial update. So the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Pez. Just going to share my screen. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
Yeah, it's all perfect. Thanks.
Perfect. So always a difficult spot in the agenda to follow both Quebec and Ontario. I'd just like to say, Maxime, thank you so much for explaining the way that things are happening in Quebec. I always find it sort of one of a kind and very ingenious. And Ian, the challenges you have on that big data is amazing. Well done. But for the rest of you, you know, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today about our forest inventory. I have been fortunate to be able to speak with you about the work we've been doing in enhanced inventory space for some time. And this year, I'd like to go through a bit of a report on the progress we've made from design into implementation and some thoughts on how we might maintain this. So here's a snapshot of our inventory. Our newest inventory is called the Forest Resource Inventory, and it's an enhanced inventory, as we've been talking about today, but different from what you saw in Quebec and in Ontario and in in PEI, it's not always LiDAR driven. We have an area of interest of 17 million hectares, which includes what we traditionally define as the commercial forest zone. And that's shown here in these blue outlines. It also includes forested parcels in the forest fringe that have been traditionally managed for agriculture. And so those are the areas south of the colored blocks here. And within our FRI, we have three public components. We have a land cover, which includes a classification to one of 11 land types. We have estimates of softwood percent and crown cover on 10-meter pixels. We have a theme called terrain, which includes a digital terrain model at a 5-meter pixel. And now this is primarily at this point derived from satellite radar. And then growing stock. And these are your sort of traditional EFI forest attributes, and they're provided at a 20-meter pixel. And it includes things like gross merchantable volume, basal area at multiple breakpoint diameters, canopy height, Lorry's height, quadratic mean diameter, etc. All of these components of the FRI are produced and made available as raster products. And then most of them are summarized to a series of auto-segmented stands that have a median size of about 2¼ hectares. So I've got a link here to our website. You can visit that website and download the entire land cover for the whole area of the interest. And so you can see, you can also see a dashboard there where it'll show these little progress dials. So land cover you can see is 100% complete, whereas some of the other themes are about 30% complete, so between 5 and 6 million hectares. The coloring on this dashboard indicates sort of the development or the stage in process. So colors in yellow are areas that we're working on. We have at least one piece of the puzzle delivered. Areas in light green, we have mapped EFI estimates and stand boundaries produced. And areas in dark green have completed forest inventory. And I'm going to talk a little bit more today about that difference between our phase 1 and our phase 2 inventories. We also produce PDF, georeferenced PDF maps for every 10 by 10 kilometer map sheet within our FRI. This allows us to really try to focus on various user levels, from the very sophisticated user with sort of all the hardware set up to do analysis in the office, to the person who would like to go out for a walk in the woods with their phone. So all of our FRIs are generated using the area-based approach, which has become pretty well established and is excellently communicated by the Canadian Forest Service. So in the center, there's a reference to the seminal publication. In Saskatchewan, we've installed over 1,400 square meter plots, and the design of those plots is familiar to many. It's very similar to what Ian had just described with their VSN plots, and the schematic is on the top right of the screen. So it's a nested plot, 11.28 meter radius for large trees, and large tree is any tree greater than 9 centimeters. Then there's a nested subplot for saplings, and that's all trees from breast height to up to that 9 centimeters. And then we split that subplot in half and measure what we call the regenerating layer, or all the tree species from 0 to 1.3 meters tall. There is a subsample of age plots, so that there are age cores extracted from trees in each of the quadrants and in the center of the plot. And that's sort of really drives our inventory. I think the interesting part about this is how do you know where to put the plots? And that's how we're going to talk about this difference between our two phases of ground plot. So the first phase is our growing stock production set. And we use an in-house variant of the nearest centroid design by Melville and Stone to subdivide a dense grid of potential sample points into a cluster that's based on similarity in remote sensing attributes. So things like HV backscatter, canopy height, canopy cover, and predicted percent softwood. The grid point closest to the center of the cluster is then selected for sampling. So in this image here, I've got a black dot showing a selected grid cell. This one would, for instance, represent the closest to the centroid of this cluster in multi-dimensional space. And what we do with that is it allows us to really become efficient in capturing the range of conditions that are out on the landscape. And this is a type of structurally guided sampling, and I'm pleased to see that Melville and Stone's algorithm has been made available as part of the SGSR package. Like I said, we use this to figure out where we should be sampling, but we also use it to assess the information yield of our existing samples when we get new remote sensing data for the same area, or if we're planning to use a transplanted enhanced forest inventory where we want to take plots from somewhere else and apply them to a new geographic area of interest. So while our phase one sample is almost a carbon copy of what you've heard and will hear today from many jurisdictions, our phase two sample is likely unique to Saskatchewan. Its motivation is probably best described by George Box's famous line that all models are wrong, some are useful. And I'm going to spend a bit of time throughout the rest of my time to tell you why I think this is so important. We use this plot, the phase two plot, to remove bias in our enhanced forest inventory estimate. So we summarize the volume by a stand. So for example, here's a large stand here separating the green from the blue. And we select a stand with probability proportional to size of total stand volume. Then we pick a random non-null volume pixel from that stand. And we establish the same 400 square meter plot we use in our phase one at that point. And what this plot allows us to do is to report the root mean square error. So think of that as a combined measure of accuracy and precision for our enhanced forest inventory for hardwood, basal area, hardwood volume, softwood, basal area, softwood volume at each pixel. And then we can assess whether or not there's any bias to our prediction. And so that's shown, an example here shown on the right, where I've got a scatter plot showing the EFI predicted gross volume versus the field plot observed gross volume on this independent phase two volume set. And you can see that there's a one-to-one line in light gray, and then a regression line in sort of the blue, light blue color. And so we can use that regression to drive the bias out of our map. In other words, to convert our EFI from a model-based inventory to a model-assisted unbiased inventory. And so we all typically report the fit of our forest inventories at the 400 square meter plot level, but almost nobody manages a forest at that scale. What's more relevant for wood supply determination is stand level precision. And so our phase two sample gets at the question of how is our inventory performing at the level people are using it? And so those of you who've tuned into this series in the past may have heard me speak about our first attempts to do this, where we're cruising whole stands. And I think Cole's Notes version is we choked on the within stand variability in our mixed woods. And I've also talked a bit about our forays into using high density LiDAR on drones. And the take home message there is we spent treasure to try to be more human and statistically efficient, but I'm not sure it turned out. And the short story now is that we've really focused our thinking. If we can estimate the precision for an area the size of a median stand, then we can probably say something reasonable about how this fits overall at the stand level. So what we do is we split a selected stand into a sampling area of about 2 hectares. And that contains the randomly selected FRP, or fixed radius plot location. So here you can see I've got it in the green hatched boundary represents a forest stand. And we randomly have selected this stand based on a PPS design. And once this stand was selected, then a random point in that stand was selected as long as it had more than 0 predicted volume. And so we established a fixed radius plot there. With that point, then we subdivide the stand into something that's manageable for sampling and is roughly that 2.5 hectares. And we generate a grid of 12 to 14 points that fall within that stand. And then we sample each of those points with a variable radius plot. So our phase 2 design then consists of a fixed radius plot and then a grid of variable radius plots, all contained within the same stand. So I've got on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see what this looks like against some imagery, in this case, a spot image. And on the right, I've slightly blown this up and compare it to the predicted gross merchantable volume raster with themes ranging from blue to very low volume to what would be orange or red or lime, which are higher volumes. So we always do the fixed radius plot first. We look at the observed basal area at that fixed radius plot, and then we use that to select a prism with the basal area factor ranging between, well, typically 1, 2, or 4, typically a 4. And we target that basal area factor to keep the trees to a reasonable number to prevent error in the field, so measurement error. And then we swing a larger basal area factor prism to select the trees for measurement. So basically we're following Kim Isle's Big Bath approach. And why do we do this? Well, many of us know intuitively that inventory results for stand levels will be better than results for individual pixels. But the question of how much better has really haunted me for a few years. Because in Saskatchewan, we're taking a pragmatic approach to input data. And I guess maybe I'm saying nicely, we can't afford LiDAR everywhere. So we have to be able to report the precision of our inventories at the scale people use. And so we put on a public statement on our FRI page about the accuracy of each of the inventories we've produced. And I think it's important that that accuracy is meaningful. It's at the level that you're met using the map. And so I've been banging my head off of this for a while. And fortunately, Jacob Strunk and Bob McGoy from US Forest Service have recently released an excellent paper on this. And I've annotated one of their figures here. So I've got the byline here. I've annotated one of their figures on the left. On the leftmost panel here, it shows the root mean square error in percentage terms of various enhanced forest inventory modeling methods. So each of those colored lines represents a different approach to building an EFI, be it random forest to regression, other nearest neighbor methods, et cetera. And along the x-axis there represent various forest attributes. So the outputs that you want, things like Lowry's height, basal area, volume, stem density. Now I've put a star at volume. And on the right panel, the same information is presented at the stand level. And then I've created a dotted line to connect these two stars just to highlight the reduction. So the root mean square error here goes from, say, 35% to 18% from the plot level to the stand level. And I think the key insight here is how to deal with sampling error. So since we can't do a census of every stand, there's some variability in our estimate of what the true volume at that stand is. And this ends up inflating the reported air at the stand level. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when you cruise a stand, you have an estimate of the stand that should represent the total stand volume plus or minus some. And we end up having to deal with that plus or minus somehow. And so Dr. Strunk and McGoy report an adjustment based on the estimated proportion of the stand that's contained within the physical measurement in the area. And so their research included or was conducted by establishing 9 fixed radius 400 square meter plots in a grid in each stand. So that's sort of shown here with what kind of look like a bunch of tires or a waffle. Now, anyone who's put in EFI plots knows that 9 400 square meter fixed radius plots is a significant investment. But the advantage of that is it really makes it clear. You know exactly what the proportion of that stand that you've measured is. And I've tried to illustrate this with black boxes here. So for this plot, if it was a fixed radius plot of 400 square meters, you know it represents, exactly this area. So you know that if you had 50 plots in a stand and you measured 9 of them, you know exactly the proportion of that stand you've measured. So what we're working on here is trying to use their math to report reasonable estimates of stand error from our plots. It's a bit more complicated to get the proportion of the stand measured with the variable radius plot, but it allows us to get an answer much more cost effectively than establishing the fixed radius plots. And so I've illustrated the sample region for 2 variable radius plots here in red. So this one at the top is in a higher volume pocket. It has larger trees, and therefore the sampled area is going to be quite a bit larger than at this point here, where it's got a lower volume estimate. The average tree is smaller, and the variable radius, the radius of that around that point will be smaller. So it's a little bit noisy compared to the pure design that Jacob and Robert have done, but I think it's going to help us out. We've completed sampling 50 stands this summer, and we'll be reporting results for a range of species types. We anticipate the results might be different in unmanaged mixedwoods than the managed southern pines that they present. And we also expect that change from in root mean square error from plot to stand may change as you move from a LiDAR to a non-LiDAR inventory. And we're going to repeat this analysis. So we have the same plots, 50 plots are in an area where we have a LiDAR-based EFI and a non-LiDAR-based EFI. And we'll look at all of these combinations. So thank you for indulging my biometric streak. Now for some exciting news on data release. So we've partnered with our industrial license holders to procure or acquire 13 million hectares of LiDAR for delivery within the next 12 months. So digital terrain models will be available soon for the 2022 data collection. We acquired about 4.5 million hectares here west of 108 degrees. So from 108 degrees to the Alberta border. And we'll produce 5-meter products on our website. And we're hoping to work with the federal government in the HRDEM project to have 1-meter rasters released for that collection. We've been acquiring data. This past summer, we acquired about 1.5 million hectares here in the center of the province, and we hope to finish the second half of that acquisition in 2024. Of course, this is somewhat smoke dependent. So what this means is that our forest inventories will actually have 3 different methods. The area-based EFI is based on LiDAR in orange. The areas in gray use a satellite-based EFI, and both of those really just focus on swapping out a different input and the same approach that I've talked about earlier this morning. And these two are compared on the right side of this slide. So we've got the bottom here is a LiDAR-based EFI or LiDAR-based DTM. The top is a satellite-based DTM. And you can get very similar products. Difference in precision, certainly, but at larger scales and 20-meter pixels, fairly similar. The third approach is under development. We have a need for information in currently unmapped areas where historical cartographers would just say, here be dragons, and they'd steer people away from it. So our focus this coming year is to develop methods to slay these dragons. We're looking at the work that the government of the Northwest Territories has pioneered in their multi-source inventory as a template, as well as testing various commercial offerings for smaller on-demand AOI within the dragon zone. And as we move from EFI production into maintenance, I'd just like to take a minute to think about the big picture of forest information needs. So along the top is our map forest inventory products. We know a lot about how to do EFI, gets a great picture of growing stock, but species estimates are still challenging. So last year I spoke about some trials we did of commercial offerings for species mapping, and I made a pitch for ways to incorporate legacy data into new maps, or made a pitch for people finding ways to do that. This year we've hired a new statistician who will help us with this, and I'm looking forward to hearing Brent's presentation this afternoon about how LiDAR can be used directly for species estimation. But it's not just maps that we need to get an allowable cut. We need growth and yield estimates to power future projections, and that's sort of shown on the bottom half of the slide. We've got tons of legacy plots. We need to continue to improve growth models to project them accurately. And there's also a growing appetite to use the EFI pixel predictions directly as virtual plots within growth models. And we need to ensure, and this is sort of why I'm so bullish on the phase 2 design, is we need to ensure that we can drive the bias out of those rasters if we're going to start using those as plots to project into the future. So the phase 2 plots are our first step on this journey. We need to continue growth model testing using research PSPs and monitoring their projection through repeat measurements on a set of plots that represent the land base. And that's where our efforts in Saskatchewan are focused over the next 3 years. That's the view of enhanced forest inventory from me. I hope that this has been somewhat informative for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, thank you so much, Lane. That was really insightful. I really like the quantification of uncertainty and bias conversation. We need to have a lot of that, a lot more of that. We are into our little break time. So if people want to take their breaks right now, please do so, and we'll reconvene in 7 minutes or so at 2:20 Atlantic time. So whatever time zone you are in, just 6-7 minutes from now. And then in the meantime, Lane, if you want to stick around, we can answer Doug's question that he just typed in here. If that works with you.
That works for me.
Okay, so the reduction in error, our RMSE, between plots and stands is a common feature of sampling forests at varying stages of development. We found the same thing when we looked at free-to-grow plots and stand level estimates using imagery interpretation. Errors are reduced when using averages. Very interesting talk. Thanks, Lane. So I guess not much of a question, but a good support.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, and then below, really great. Any comment on variable radius being contained in the stands? Variable radius.
Yes. So it's important because the area of interest we're drawing here is in that stand. So you have to take some precautions to make sure that that stand is sampled appropriately. So we use, for example, we don't avoid the edges. We use edge correction methods such as the walkthrough to make sure that all trees in a stand have a proper inclusion area.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that clarification. And oh, we have another question here. Is there a plan to release LiDAR point cloud data? Thanks a lot.
We're looking at how we might do that. In some of the cases, we don't have 100% ownership of that LiDAR data, so it's co-owned with an industrial license. The other challenges around the release of the point clouds is the infrastructure. So we're trying to work through some arrangements there so that we might be able to do that. And I hope to be able to talk about that maybe next February.
Okay, perfect. Well, looking forward to that. We'll make a spot for you to share your insights. Thank you very much, Lane. I think that's all the questions for you for now. If not, you can follow directly with Lane and his email that was in his presentation.
Thank you.
All right, so we have 4 more minutes of our break, and then we'll reconvene for in 4 minutes. See you soon. Now, welcome back, everyone. It's 2:20 Atlantic time, and I think we're going to get ourselves ready for the Alberta update. So, Rebecca,
We
you can
certainly are.
Start when you're ready.
Share my screen. Share. Are you able to see that, Pez?
Perfect. It's all good.
Excellent. All right, so we're getting into Alberta and Western Canada, following it up. I'm Rebecca Warren. I'm with the Government of Alberta in the Forestry and Parks Division. And I'm going to start this off by just kind of giving everyone a kind of overview of what we're doing on the Government of Alberta side of things. Short story, it's probably not as interesting as what's going on in Eastern Canada. And then I'm going to pass it over to Monica Kohler, who's with the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute, to talk about some of their much more exciting LiDAR work. So inventory in Alberta, just to kind of give the background for those who may not know, it's generally industry-led, meaning that the Government of Alberta sets the regulations, policy, and standards for what an inventory is supposed to look like, but it is left up to industry as part of their tenure to do that inventory. And so as a result of how the standards have been written, this is pretty much entirely photo interpretation. GOA does do some inventory and some crown land, but mostly this is industry, and the product we get at the end is photo interpreted based on aerial imagery. While that is the case, we have an ongoing number of projects and partnerships to try to look beyond photo interpretation. How can we take advantage of the different data sets out there, LiDAR and stuff like that? So I'll talk about it in some of the later slides, some of the projects we have, but we are looking at how do we incorporate EFI into our current policies and standards? What are some new techniques and different types of data sets, whether it's the LiDAR, drone imagery, or other types of satellite imagery? How can we take that and use it to fill the policy needs or the policy that we have currently on the table, which would be for reforestation or the inventory? So that's kind of where Alberta is. We're still looking at what's out there. There's definitely a plethora of data, and I'll show you in the next slide where we do have some of the LiDAR data. But what we're looking on then this year and next year, hopefully I can update on this soon, is how do we incorporate EFI and these different types of technologies into our policy to move into the future and kind of see where we can leave photo interpretation behind. So just to show you, on the left is where we currently have AVI. So that's the Alberta Vegetation Inventory up until this year. It's based on photos. I think the last set of photos was 2022. But as you can see, because inventory is left to industry, it's kind of done as needed for them. So this might be on a 10-year period when they have to redo their management plans, or in some cases, it's 20, 30 years old. So, and anywhere in the light colors, it's pretty old inventory that we have, and the red is the newer stuff. So it is quite sporadic. We don't have a full provincial data set like Ontario does. We love it, but this is how it essentially is in Alberta. And then on the right here, just showing you where there's planned inventory coming in the next few years. So we are getting a nice input of new inventory as well as LiDAR. The thing I should mention, because this question is coming up a lot of times during the presentations, is that, again, because it is industry-led, pretty much all the data sets are not publicly available. That doesn't mean they're not able to be shared. It usually just means you need to go to the different forestry companies, whoever the license holder is, and ask them if you can use that for any type of research. If there's questions about where or who you should ask, feel free to reach out to me. I do have my email at the end of this presentation, but we can kind of point you in the right direction. So as I mentioned, there is some ongoing work to try to look at the different ways, the different technologies that are out there to incorporate into our existing policy and standards. So one of the big projects that has just recently wrapped up is we were working with Nicholas's Krupp's group at UBC to see how we could use drone imagery to essentially get away from field surveys for reforestation and into satellite or drone based. So for reforestation standards in Alberta, we're either looking at a survey at the 2 to 3 year mark after harvest, and then again at 14 months, just to make sure that we have establishment, there are saplings growing there, and then later on to make sure that it is the right trajectory of where we're planned to go for that. And that again is led by industry. So these are a couple papers, if you're interested in this, that we did work on with Nicholas Krupp's group to see if we could use that imagery to get that. And it was pretty good at detecting the different types of crowns. But like with a lot of the work we see still in LiDAR, it's not super great at species differentiation, which it's difficult in the field. It's something that we are actively looking at and working on. But as you can imagine, with our reforestation standards, we're acceptable trees for a survey. I think for conifers is 60 centimeters, and then deciduous is 120 centimeters. So these are very small trees. There's not big distinction between species. But if we can get into that, it is promising. Still looking into it a bit more. And then another work that I think Monica will also mention is we're now working with ABMI with some of the LiDAR they've collected to see how that LiDAR works for kind of getting into these types of reforestation surveys, and if we can use LiDAR to get what the information we're looking for. And then the last two, just because the inventory that we expect from companies is more photo interpretive based, that doesn't mean the companies aren't interested in doing EFI. And so a lot of the cases, they will give GOA the photo interpreted inventory and then go ahead and make their own EFI because it's much more useful for their operations. So we've had a number of projects working with different industry groups to say, here, make an EFI. How can you take that EFI and meet it to the ABI standards? How does that look? Where are the issues? And then essentially on us, and something I'm hopefully leading up in the next little bit, was figuring out, okay, how far did we get with this? What's missing? And then how can we address it to really take the benefits of both EFI and ABI, merge those together with the least amount of cons or drawbacks to those methods. So that's an ongoing one. And then with last year's fire season, we weren't able to collect all the imagery we needed to delineate our burn. So like our inventory, our harvest and burn mapping is still done with photo interpretation. And so because there were just so many fires, we weren't able to collect all the imagery we needed. And we also had to contract out a lot of this mapping work because it was just too much to do it in-house. So assuming that last year isn't an anomaly and we're going to have to deal with this in the future, how do we increase the efficiency of this type of mapping to do it faster, to get that information out there and to be able to imagine an increase in fires on the landscape? However, while also, and this kind of plays into a lot of the kind of policy and questions we're asking ourselves on the government side, is there's lots of great remote sensing data sets out there that can give you the information you look for, particularly when it comes to burn mapping. There's lots of examples in the literature of exactly this. Where we struggle a little bit is with, in this case with burn mapping, these are used to calculate the decrease in annual allowable cut. So the precision of the area measurements need to be quite accurate. So it's figuring out the balance between accuracy and efficiency. So that's kind of the recap of just what's going on the government side. I'm going to turn it over to Monica now to talk about some of the LiDAR work.
Thanks, Rebecca, and hi, everyone. I'm hoping I'm coming through okay. I didn't get here early enough to do the mic test.
You're all good.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm super excited to be here and speak to you guys about some of the work that's going on in Alberta. For those that haven't heard of the ABMI before, we're an arm's length nonprofit that's focused on biodiversity monitoring in Alberta. We work really closely with GOA on a bunch of different initiatives and also many other sectors across Alberta. So I really feel like I'm here kind of representing a huge collective of different organizations and sectors that are coming together around supporting LiDAR data collection with our lens really looking at for the purpose of biodiversity monitoring. So I'm going to kind of show you a snapshot of how we're using some of it for biodiversity applications. So we're working with multiple collaborators. I kind of showed the list of them here to compile as much data as we can across the province. And then we are operating our own LiDAR sensor and 4-band camera and focused on filling in gaps in coverage in some of the really high priority areas where we're doing some of this biodiversity work. So I have a couple of maps that show coverage of some of the LiDAR that we've been able to bring together. This is a very simplified map just to make a really simple visual, but this is coverage across the province kind of over the past 5 years. So since 2019, it does include some of the work that we have planned for 2024 in it. So that's obviously sort of planned, and we'll see how it goes with the smoke and conditions this upcoming summer. It's about half the province, or maybe a bit over half the province now, that's been collected since that time. Again, it's definitely a team effort across all of those different organizations, and it's been this iterative progress in terms of filling in gaps in coverage. And if you go to the next slide, this shows a bit of a breakdown in terms of some of the major sources involved in collecting this LiDAR data. So we're working really closely with FRIA, the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta. They've been a big leader in terms of LiDAR data collection and helping us use this for different biodiversity monitoring purposes. And then the other sort of major source is kind of generalized into GOA, ABMI sources. And then we have about 50,000 that we're planning to collect this upcoming summer. So on our side, this is kind of the snapshot of what we're interested at ABMI in using this for, which is really an emphasis on biodiversity monitoring. So we have a number of different projects where we're looking at leveraging LiDAR in order to improve mapping of human footprint, vegetation regeneration, and also testing different methods for wetland mapping or wetland inventory. So those are all active right now. And then we also have some ideas and kind of an interest in the future around soil quality, riparian areas, and also grasslands. So these are some of the sort of main interests for us. And I have just a couple slides that show you some of the things that we've been working on with human footprint and vegetation regeneration. So, and I think you can just click once more, Rebecca, so it's all up. We have an existing product in Alberta that's wall-to-wall that maps human footprint across the entire province and does a bunch of attribution and shows all the different feature types. That's called our human footprint inventory. It's done with heads-up digitization of SPOT 2020. And what we're currently doing is looking at how we can improve the seismic line component of that inventory using LiDAR. And we've developed a new workflow that we've called Seismic Shift. And it has some similarities with what we saw from Maxime in Quebec in terms of you can see those seismic lines in the original version don't always follow the exact pathway. So we've developed this workflow to really map the seismic lines very accurately, get the center line really accurate. And we've also found through this workflow that we're able to find a lot more seismic lines, particularly low impact. So you can see in the comparison how many more seismic lines we were able to identify and observe by using LiDAR. And if you go to the next slide, a lot of our drive and purpose in terms of why we're doing this connects back to caribou. Caribou are a major conservation issue, endangered species. And so we're really working with GOA and Forestry and others to be able to provide information on caribou habitat using LiDAR. And so there's some pretty specific information needs in order to understand and respond to caribou habitat. The first is that really highly accurate understanding of those lines and the delineation. So it's a big part of why we're doing it is to get really accurate information on seismic lines. And then the second is to be able to understand on those lines how vegetation is regrowing. It's a major part of sort of caribou predator-prey dynamics and part of the management issue. So the second piece of our workflow is a vegetation classification model. That's a machine learning based algorithm using LiDAR. This is kind of a simplified version of it, but at the end, we're really getting down to height, density, cover, and basic vegetation class of trees that are regrowing on seismic lines and other disturbance features in caribou ranges and other sort of large areas of the province. So I think I just have maybe one or two more. This just shows a couple examples of kind of some of the results that come out of our vegetation classification model. This is kind of a zoom in on a well pad with a bit of a line. You can see the classification that we're getting down to. These have heights associated with them as well, and you can scale that up to kind of a larger area to see the picture. And then if you click once more, we can do things like summarize this for different segments or sort of areas of disturbance. Where we're ultimately going with this is wanting to be able to develop an approach to classify parts of seismic lines into different types of recovery from a caribou perspective, in order to really be able to have an evidence-based understanding of caribou habitat and its status and where restoration efforts should really be focused. So we'll be generating these types of results for sort of wall-to-wall coverage within caribou ranges within Alberta. And I think that's it for me. So I'll just say thank you and thanks to Rebecca. And I think we're probably both happy to take questions.
Well, thank you very much
Thanks.
for that Alberta update. It's super insightful, and I love to see all the different angles and perspectives we get across the country. It always blows my mind. So we have a couple minutes for questions if anyone wants to type some into our chat. And if not, then we'll just proceed to the next one, and we know where to reach Rebecca and Monica. Thank you for sharing your emails. Oh, there we go. Maybe someone. So Ian says, hi, Monica. I understand that the Federal Recovery Plan Fund found a correlation between caribou and linear disturbance using their data set. Is the plan to redo the correlation work with the additional line inventory?
Not on our side, so we don't currently have a plan to do that type of analysis. I don't know that it's out of the question, and we do work really closely hand in hand with GOA caribou biologists. So I think we would probably, if we did do that, want to reach out to them and maybe folks in the federal government as well, but it's not currently something that we're planning on doing.
All right, thank you. And I have a curiosity question regarding, so you both have access to different types of data sets, and is there any exchanges that are happening between your two groups, the ABMI and then the government inventory side? Or are you bound by ownership of data sets also?
It's a little bit of both. Correct me if I'm wrong, Monica, but I believe the ABMI LiDAR will be openly available eventually. It just needs to go through a QA/QC process and some other processes along there. The other part that's industry or anything FRIA is related to industry. So that's kind of what I was alluding to, where that typically is industry owned. So it's not going to be publicly available. It doesn't mean it can't be shared. You just need to ask the holder for it and kind of work in an agreement or a data use agreement between you and them. ABMI and GOA do work together. We're hoping to do kind of look at some of the LiDAR data and the models they've developed for the regeneration mapping on seismic lines to see if we can apply that to harvest blocks. That's a project we'd like to get started, and why Monica and I started talking a few months ago. So there's overlap. There's lots of things moving on. We can probably do better at sharing. There's a lot of data in Alberta. It's just not super accessible. And we know that. We'd like to improve upon it, but that's kind of the state of where it is right now.
Well, that's great. And here's another question from Doug here saying, has the processing time issue been resolved to allow operational automation of regeneration surveys? I think it's a very interesting question.
On our side, regeneration surveys? Or just
either or on your side or Monica? I think you're both working on different lenses and different approaches to regeneration surveys.
on the GOA side, I can't speak to it perfectly. I don't typically deal with that, but it's very much based in field surveys and crews going out there and then that information being submitted and going through a whole process. I don't know what the timeline is on that off the top of my head. Not really related to, I guess, specifically EFI, but just we are in the process of kind of a digital transformation for anything like the reforestation surveys and other operating plans and inventory to improve our data structure. So it's way easier for industry to submit that to us to review it, tell them yes or no, and kind of get that process going. That's an active tool or IT system we're developing, but we haven't really delved into like processing LiDAR imagery for reforestation.
Okay, how about you, Monica, on the LiDAR and imagery side of things?
Yeah, so it's kind of a bit of both in the workflow that we have right now. So we're definitely building AI models that do a bunch of it automatically, both in that seismic shift component and the veg model component. But there is some manual pieces built in, like in terms of building training and validation data sets. We do a lot of checking, in particular of the seismic shift to get to that final product. We do have people kind of going through tiles and doing manual fixes and identification of errors and so some like quality checks. That part is still manual. I also do want to acknowledge Jennifer Martin, who's here, and she's the lead within FRIA and is a great contact for folks looking for more information on those FRIA data sets.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I was reading that question and I didn't know if it was a question or a comment, but now I know that Jennifer is mentioning that if you're interested in FRIA data, please email her, and her email is in this question and answer block. So awesome, thank you very much for that. And then our final questions, if we can sneak one in. What is your modeling approach for vegetation classification with LiDAR?
Ooh, you know, I don't know that I'm the right person to answer that question. And I do have someone named Franco who maybe will happily write an answer for me back in the chat while we go on to the next one.
Perfect, thank you. Well, I really appreciate your time and your presentation. Thank you, Rebecca and Monica. And yeah, that's it for now. And we'll move on to our final provincial presentation from British Columbia. So Chris, it's good to see you, and the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Let me just try to share this here. All right. Are you seeing that presentation, Pez?
Perfectly, thank you.
All right.
Good to go.
Good. So yeah, my name's Chris Butson, and I'm the team lead for the remote sensing and geospatial applications team under the Forest Analysis and Inventory branch here in British Columbia. So today I'm just gonna kind of give a brief update on our current status of airborne laser scanning and enhanced forest inventories. Just get this. Okay, so here's a presentation outline. I'll just talk a bit about this new provincial LiDAR program that just got underway last summer. The second point here, I'll talk a bit about how we're using airborne laser scanning to improve photo estimation for our VRI process. Third, I'll talk a bit about the predictive forest inventories that we're generating with the LiDAR data, which I've talked a bit about in the past. And I'll end off here with a few of the other projects that are keeping us busy when we're not doing the other 1, 2, and 3. So, all right, so I'm really kind of excited to talk about this one. And so, you know, typically I've been doing these talks for probably at least 10 years or so. And, you know, it's always a point of contention when I talk about how much has been acquired across BC. And it's typically over the last 10 years, it's been really decentralized and through mostly industry procurement. And we've done it on a project by project basis within our branch. So we typically pay the contractor to acquire the LiDAR, and then we put in a bunch of ground samples and we do the modeling after that. So, but yeah, typically it's collected on a project by project basis or tenure area. And up to now, we have free and open data on the LiDAR portal, and it's only about 11% coverage of the province. So you can see this in the graphic on the right. And it's taken about 10 years to acquire all this data and over 25 million to assemble it. So that's pretty costly. And yeah, it's really kind of scattered around all these different areas across the province. So this provincial LiDAR program, we're hoping will kind of benefit all these different kind of priorities within our natural resource business areas. So, you know, emergency planning and response. We've had, you know, historic years of wildfire over the last 5 years. There's been, you know, three historic years of wildfire, including the most current years, 2023. And then we had some historic flooding in 2021 as well. So Emergency planning and response is the first one here. Co-management of land and natural resources. We're trying to co-manage the land with a bunch of other players, industry and First Nations. And yeah, I think the LiDAR program will help with that. Obviously, forest planning is a big one. We have a new set of forest landscape plans that are going ahead in the province. And so that's an important one for that. Also planning for climate change. It's kind of a goal of the government these days, is to kind of planning and for this changing climate. Another important one here is government-to-government negotiations with our First Nations and treaty areas across the province. And then the last one is for innovation research. So yeah, that's what we're hoping to get out of this new LiDAR program. So, so just kind of in summary, we're partnered with Ministry of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship, and GOBC is under that that ministry, and so we're partnered with them to in this program for a $39 million budget over 4 years, and it's pretty much to acquire LiDAR over the province and to get it out as open data, so as many people can use it as possible. So we have 2 dedicated aircraft capable of flying 300 kilometers squared per hour. So it's a pretty ambitious program that we're embarking on here. And this graphic on the right just shows what we were able to complete when we started in August of 2023, and what our partial areas. So we're kind of treating these all as individual map tiles and counting them all up. And so we have 2.6 million completed tiles and 2.9 million partially completed tiles so far. So yeah, this graphics is just current to January 16. And I'm not sure, I think they took a couple months off over the winter, but they're really trying to push the envelope and fly as much as possible. So yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to talk about was the existing LiDAR we have. So I told you 11% of the province is currently available on the portal. But under this new program, we're completely flying the entire province. So 100 million hectares we're trying to fly with that $39 million, which, you know, it's probably a bit low on the budget in terms of, yeah, maybe the workload or whatever, but we're actually getting the raw flights and the calibration flights for the LiDAR, and GOBC is doing all the kind of processing, all the corrections, and the point cloud classification. So they're doing all the heavy lifting on this project for sure. So in terms of the LiDAR derivatives and open data that we're going to be hosting, the first 2 are going to be hosted on the actual LiDAR portal that's up and running now, and the second 2 we're still trying to find a home for those internally on one of our government networks. So we're going to be providing a digital elevation model at 1 meter, and this is pretty much you know, for forestry, it's important for augmenting our vegetation resources inventory, geoengineering, and some flood and fire risk mapping. So that's an important one. And the canopy height model will also be producing at 1 meter. And so this is also to kind of help the photo interpreters with the VRI. This will feed into our new predictive forest inventories across the province and help out with habitat mapping and harvest operations as well. And these last 2, we're kind of building these internally for our own you know, predictive forest inventories and enhanced forest inventories. So we thought, why not, you know, give out these kind of stepping stones or building blocks to anyone else that wants to use them. So the third one here is an individual tree database. So we're getting individual tree tops from the canopy height model. And these are currently being used to help out with the VRI, the predictive forest inventory, trying to find productive old growth across the province, and generating stand and stock tables for some of these inventories. And the last one, which we use internally pretty much for all of our enhanced forest inventories, are the canopy surface metrics. And so we'll be providing these at 20 meters, and the list of these is pretty exhaustive. I think we have currently about 200, and that list is growing. So we still have to find a home to where we're hosting these, but the data set should be pretty small. So we're hoping it's not too onerous. So I guess this LiDAR program has kind of benefits and challenges to forest inventory across British Columbia. So the benefits, kind of consistent 3D data across the province, which hopefully everyone knows here on the call. We're currently using LiDAR to improve current VRI projects with better terrain models for photo interp and tree height grid samples, so they can have a calibrated height on the ground that they can use to do the photo interp. And we're also using or developing these new predictive forest inventories that are all LiDAR based. In terms of challenges, probably the biggest challenge is kind of the time constraint and the money constraint. So you know, it's a 4-year program and we're trying to cover 100 million hectares. So that equates to about 3 million hectares of data coming in every month. With that in mind, we need additional funding to develop capacity for new predictive forest inventories. And yeah, like I say, large data volumes. So we're going to be spinning a lot of disks, 3 million hectares every month. So now I'll just kind of summarize what these predictive forest inventories are all about. I've talked about these for a few years, and we've completed one, and we're almost complete. We've almost completed another one, and we're starting in on a third one. So these are kind of next generation enhanced forest inventories that we're running in these timber supply areas across the province, and they're done in 2 phases. So the PFI1, as we're calling it, is a regression-based inventory attribute prediction based on fixed radius ground samples used for calibration. So it's a typical enhanced forest inventory that is common to everyone on the call here. To get at both species and age, which are still tough to model in a regression-based approach, we're doing an imputation-based inventory prediction designed to use many high spatial resolution stereo photo samples and with a high sampling intensity over the project area. So the predictive forest inventory that we just completed last year, it was in the boundary timber supply area, borders on the border of the US down here in the south. And we set up some photo strips. So we were getting 10 centimeter 4-band photo samples across all these strips and getting photo interpretations done on all those to aid in the species imputation and age imputation as well. This one in the interior here, in the Caribou, between 100 Mile House and Williams Lake, we're at the modeling stage now, and we've been collecting ground samples over the last 2 years. So that should wrap up in the next, 3 or 4 months, we're hoping. And following that, we'll be initiating this new predictive forest inventory over 1.3 million hectares in the Invermere timber supply area in the Rocky Mountains. So just to talk a bit about how we're using LiDAR data to improve some of our VRI photo estimation. So in these new VRI project areas, we're deriving both terrain, 1 meter terrain surfaces and individual tree samples to aid in this photo interpretation process. The terrain helps with the stereo following, and you can actually get height from ground measurements. And so we've actively completed this process. In the lower left graphic here, you can see the Sunshine Coast is ongoing right now, and the pink areas show where the LiDAR is available. And then also on the lower mainland is the Fraser TSA, which has been completed. And so we've used this kind of supplemental LiDAR data to help with these photo interpretations. The LiDAR individual tree sample grid is generated over a 100-meter grid with a 20-meter radius neighborhood, and it helps to provide the interpreter with a local height sample. And it can be directly attributed or as an interpreter calibration. And just a couple of these other projects that we're using LiDAR for. So BC Woodlot LiDAR forest inventories. We have a couple of these going on right now on the coast. And these are just small, really small tenures, 400 hectares, 500 hectares that have acquired LiDAR on their own, done all the ground sampling on their own, but they need help doing kind of the modeling or any kind of step in the enhanced forest inventory process. So we're helping them along with that. The LiDAR individual tree inventories are popular in the tree farm licenses across BC. And this is all licensee-led work ongoing in several TFLs to support enhanced forest inventory, timber supply review, and old growth management. And the last one here is the predictive ecosystem mapping using LiDAR across the province. So right now, that project has included about 5.7 million hectares of LiDAR in different areas. And we're hoping to ramp that up once the collection is complete to have a wall-to-wall provincial coverage of the predictive ecosystem mapping. And that's my talk today. Have a few minutes for some questions, or you can always email me. Thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing that great insight, and congratulations. It seems like a culmination of years of work into a big strategy now. I'm sure it's exciting and scary at the same time.
It is. It's like a blessing and a curse, but yeah, we'll see how it goes for sure.
Yeah, I guess while we're waiting for questions to come in, I was wondering if what type of data storage or processing pipelines you're envisioning to ingest all this incoming data coming in.
Yeah, so GeoBC is handling that. They got a bunch of NAS drives that they're working with internally, and so we're going to be tapping into a few of those, I think, to transfer data from our office to their office. They really are doing the heavy lifting though in terms of all the classifications and corrections and stuff like that with the data. So, and really they are, I think for the most part, using AI software to do a lot of the classifications. So if anyone has any ideas or kind of pitfalls or benefits of AI software to do the point cloud classifications, I'm all ears because yeah, I think that's, and they're really just getting to know the software now. So it's really a steep uphill battle, I think, to actually go through all this data, and even in terms of what we have on the portal now, we just found some errors in some of the data last week that should have been caught 4 years ago, so QA is going to be an important aspect of all the data coming in. So yeah, we want to get ahead of that.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And hopefully people online will be able to reach out and give you a helping hand or some advice.
All right. Yeah.
So we have a question here. Will this data be available on GeoBC or MOF?
It'll be through the GeoBC portal. Like that's how they house the current LiDAR data. So it'll be available there.
Okay, perfect. And then Robert is asking, you mentioned costs as a factor. Does BC have an estimate of the cost per hectare to provide for complete FRI, example, LiDAR, field plots, photo acquisition, interpretation?
So the cost for us was probably about, so in the boundary TSA, when we produced the predictive forest inventory, we did have a couple partners, and that was really helpful. And that brought the cost down a lot because they actually acquired the data, provided the data to us. And so I think we came out around $1.50 a hectare, $1.50 for a hectare of predictive forest inventory.
Well, it seems like a good bargain.
And especially that's on par with the VRI, right? I think the VRI that we've been producing are about $2 a hectare or something like that. So,
okay.
And we're not losing the VRI. We're going to keep that as a going forward as well. So we're just kind of doing different things in different areas.
Perfect. Well, it seems like that's it for questions for now. You can always reach Chris out, reach out to Chris via his email. Well, thank you very much for that update and insight. Always a pleasure to hear from you.
Thanks, Bez.
Okay, now our next presenter will be Margaret Penner, and she has some really interesting insights for us. So You can share your screen whenever you're ready, and oh, perfect. We can see it perfectly now.
Great, and can you hear me?
Oh yes, you're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of our work with you. First of all, this was a team effort. A big thank you to Joanne White of the Canadian Forest Service in Victoria and to Murray Woods, retired from the Ontario province. Big parts of this team and a lot of work done by them. So thank you. And also thank you to our collaborators. And I'm not, there we go. Thank you to Green First, the Algonquin Forestry Authority, the Petawawa Research Forest in the Ontario province, and also to the the Forestry Futures Trust for funding this project. So we had done some work on LiDAR inventories at Petawawa and encountered vertical structure. So in this project, we looked at using LiDAR to predict vertical structure. So for this project, vertical structure, we're referring to the presence or absence of these horizontal layers. Sometimes these arise naturally, sometimes they're a result of forest management, like uniform shelterwood. So in this transect on the left portion, it's unharvested, has a range of tree sizes, kind of crowns going from the top to the bottom of the canopy. The right portion was harvested, so there are fewer larger trees and there's a layer of small trees below. So the two portions of the left and the right portion have been managed differently, and they'll probably grow differently. So layers may provide important information for forest management, but also for perhaps wildlife, fire behavior, and other uses. So can we identify these layers and produce inventory attributes by layer? So in Ontario, like most places, we're using an area-based approach. So typically, ABA inventories have ignored layers. Attributes like volume and basal area are predicted for the pixel, include all the trees, but we may be interested in knowing things like volume by layer. If only the overstory is harvested, then the inventory volume will overestimate the harvested volume. So in the previous round of inventories in Ontario, what's referred to as the T1 round, vertical structure was introduced as a photo interpreted attribute, and it included species composition, age, height, and crown closure by layer for an upper and a lower canopy layer. So can we quantify that structure? So here are examples of kind of the four main types of vertical structure that we're talking about. It's a subjective assessment, but we went with it. On the left is kind of a classic single story, single layer. It's kind of a shallow canopy layer, kind of up there. This is super great for inventories. Then moving to the right of it is a complex stand with a very deep canopy, no distinct layers. Then the third from the left is a two-story canopy. There's an upper layer, a lower layer, and there's kind of a gap in between. And then on the far right is a single tree with veterans. So there's a canopy layer, but there are some crowns that are emerging quite a bit above that main canopy layer. So those are the four types of structure that we were working with. The ones on the left, around circled in orange or surrounded by orange, those are kind of single canopy layers. One's really shallow, one's really deep. The two on the right are we consider two-layered. One has distinct separation of the layers and the other doesn't have that distinct separation. So we looked at developing an algorithm to assess and predict structure. The forests that we were looking at, most of the work was done at Petawawa. I'll show results for the Algonquin Park Forest, which is the pink, for the French Severn Forest, which is the green. These are all Great Lakes St. Lawrence forest types, a little bit of the Romeo Millet and a little bit of the Dog River Matawan, which are more boreal. I'll focus mainly on the Great Lakes St. Lawrence forest though. So just how common is structure? The left pie chart shows Algonquin Park. About 12% of the area is considered single story and about half is complex. So about 40% of the area is in two-tiered canopy conditions. On the right is a boreal example. But half the area is single and another 30% is complex. So two-tiered conditions are not as much of an issue in the boreal. So that's why I'm presenting results mainly for the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence. Just more visuals on what those different forest types are. Here's a red pine plantation that's been thinned. Classic single story, beautiful for a LiDAR inventory. It works super well here. Here is a white pine shelterwood, 2 distinct layers. Sometimes with LiDAR, these layers are even more obvious than when you're standing there in the field, but classic 2-tiered condition. This one's a little more difficult. We call this one complex. There's no distinct layers. There's a wide range of tree size in terms of height and diameter. And then the ones that start to kind of blur the lines. Here's, it almost looks like there's 2 layers there, but are there really? And two people looking at this same point cloud may come up with 2 different classifications. So there is some subjectivity in the assignment of vertical structure. We had these calibration plots. We had 269 of them for Petawawa, and we wanted to be able to predict structure. So Murray and I went through all the point clouds and assigned each calibration plot as one of those 4 vertical structure types. And then we tried predicting them using LiDAR predictors, the standard LiDAR predictors, and using random forest. So trying to predict those 4 vertical structure classes. And here are our results in the left table. Along the top are the predicted structures. Along the left side are what Murray and I called as vertical structure. We did very well on predicting the 2-tiered condition, the most common condition. The next one we did well on was the single condition, and that was the second most common. Where we didn't do as well were on the less frequent conditions. So on the complex stands and on the single tree with veterans, or single layer with veterans. We didn't do as well on those. Overall, the agreement was 68%. But there's not that much. We considered both complex and single to be 1 layer. So if we misclassified complex as single, it wasn't that big of a deal. So if we consider all of the top 4 categories, the top left 4 categories as kind of being single, we can collapse that to a 2-class system. So complex or single with veterans or 2-tiered, and our overall agreement went up to 74%. So that's classifying them in the 4 classes and then collapsing them, we got 74%. If we predicted the 2-class system directly, it only went up to 75% agreement. So we kept with the 4-class system. So we predicted the 4-class system, not the 2-class system. But there was also that issue of over predicting the more common conditions and under predicting the less common conditions. So we wanted to investigate whether we should be weighting our calibration plots. So in this bar chart, the blue bars are the actual frequency of plots by vertical structure. So 2-tiered was the most common, followed by single, and then complex and single with veterans. The dark orange represent our predictions without any weighting. So again, we over predicted the more common conditions and we under predicted the less common conditions. If we weighted by sample prevalence, like the frequency in our calibration data, we got the gray bars, which were quite similar to the orange bars as expected. Again, we over predicted common conditions and under predicted rarer conditions. If we applied a uniform weighting to our calibration data, we reversed that over and under prediction. We tended to under predict the more common conditions, and we tended to over predict the rare conditions. And again, that is what we would expect. So this weighting can be a powerful way of adjusting our predictions to meet some expectation of what might be in the population. The problem with the weighting is we didn't know what the weights should be. if we knew what the distribution of these vertical structures were in the population, we could use that for weights. But our calibration data, we used a structurally guided sampling, so it wasn't a representative sample from the population, so we couldn't use the sample distribution for weights, and we didn't have another source of information for determining those weights, so we didn't do any weighting. But it does remain a powerful tool if there is some way to generate those weights. Again, overall agreement on predicting vertical structure about 3 years of the time. So went and applied it to the Algonquin Park forest. So those calibration plots were used to predict structure for the forest, and in Algonquin Park, the southwest portion of the park tends to be more tolerant hardwoods and hemlocks, more selection management, where we would expect to see more complex and single tier conditions, and that's what we were seeing predicted. The northeast tends to be more white pine uniform shelterwood conditions, where we'd expect to see more two-tiered conditions, and that's what we were seeing. So we were pleased with the results for Algonquin Park, and went on to trying to predict attributes by layer. So if we know it's a two-tier condition, can we start to partition things like volume and basal area by layer? So back to those 4 vertical structures. So we're going to concentrate on the 2 on the right now, the ones that we have the presence of distinct layers. So focusing on that plot in particular, we took that plot and kind of rotated it on its side, and we looked at the distribution of LiDAR returns above ground. So here's a histogram of the LiDAR returns. You can see there's a bunch of LiDAR returns between about 5 and 7, 8 meters. And then there are a bunch of LiDAR returns between about 25 and 32 meters above the ground. So looks like 2 layers to me. The histogram at the top is the same thing, but rather than LiDAR returns, it's the measured tree heights on the ground. And again, there's apparently 2 layers there. There's a bunch of trees with heights around 10 meters, and then a bunch of trees with heights around 30, 32, 35 meters. So we looked at that histogram. We fit a kernel smoothing to that histogram, and we looked at the first derivative of that as well. So we can see those 2 distinct bulges. There's those 2 layers. The maximum of the layers correspond to where this first derivative is 0. So that makes it easy to detect the position of those maxima. And the inflection points are where the first derivative is either a maximum or a minimum. So we could identify, it was easy to identify the peaks, the valleys, and the inflection points on the smooth kernel function. So assuming that this bulge is a lower layer, this bulge is the upper layer, we took as the top of the lower layer, this bulge, the maximum here represents kind of the middle of the lower canopy layer. We wanted to identify the top. And so for the top of the lower canopy, we assigned it as that inflection point. So we had kind of an automated way of estimating the top of the lower canopy layer based on the LiDAR returns for each one of our calibration points. So we've identified vertical structure for all our calibration plots, the top of the lower layer for all of our calibration plots, and we are predicting them using LiDAR attributes, just the basic LiDAR summaries with some hand picking of ones that we liked and removing some that we didn't feel should be contributing. So now we're going to do that, apply those random forest models to the population. So on the left are the predictions of vertical structure. You can see some evidence of strip cutting here. On the right is a raster of the top of the lower canopy layer. To partition the inventory attributes by layer, we made a few more assumptions. To estimate height by layer, we took the codominant height for the pixel as the height of the upper layer. That made sense. we were predicting the top of the lower layer, and we took that as the height of the lower layer. We assumed that the proportion of basal area in each layer is proportional to the crown closure associated with that layer. And that allowed us to partition the basal area into upper layer and lower layer. So we're taking the overall combined basal area and partitioning it by the proportion of crown closure by layer. To partition the gross total volume by layer, we made another assumption. We assumed that the form factor for each layer was constant. So the form factor, kind of the ratio between a cylinder and of the same height and diameter as the tree and the tree volume itself. Then we could partition gross total volume and get gross total volume by layer. To estimate quadratic mean diameter by layer, we made the further assumption that the height diameter ratio is constant by layer. That allowed us to get our main attributes partitioned by layer, and stems just falls out of basal area and quad mean diameter. So again, we can generate rasters of gross total volume by layer for the lower layer, for the upper layer. So we've got the rasters, then we need to move to the polygons. So to move from the pixel to the polygon, the majority rules. So things that were mostly single, we assigned the whole polygon to be single. If most of the polygon was two-tiered, we said the whole polygon was two-tiered. And most of the orange polygons on the right tended to be pine shelterwood, which made sense. Those tend to be our two-tiered conditions. Most of the light green and dark green tend to be selection and some mixed woods. Again, that made sense to us from a forest management point of view and a forest structure point of view. So for a single tier polygon, most of the pixels are single. So we say it's single tier. All of the basal area, all of the volume, the quad mean diameter, all get assigned to the upper layer. The lower layer gets filled with zeros. For two-tiered conditions, we partition that original estimate of BA into BA of the lower layer and the upper layer. Same thing for volume, lower layer and upper layer. Again, in this polygon, the majority were two-tiered, and so we assigned the whole polygon two-tiered. But you can see there's always variation within the polygon as well. Back to the boreal. Not as much structure. This is the Romeo Millet forest. Most of the forest is single or complex, but there are small pockets of two-tiered conditions, and we can partition the inventory when that occurs. There is evidence. These are some transects from the Dog River Matawan. You can see there is a fair bit of structure in some of these polygons, but it mostly gets classified as complex in the inventory. And when you look at some of these, there is structure, but it's really patchy within the polygon. So trying to split something like this, you know, these are the field samples along that transect. It goes from poplar to white pine to white birch along that transect, and trying to split something like this into horizontal layers may not be that useful. So we thought our results were promising for predicting structure and partitioning attributes by structure, but we still need species and age from somewhere, and we haven't got that. So ideally in the workflow, we would provide the photo interpreter with the structure raster and get them to look at the polygon then, and taking that structure raster, assign a polygon, a code of a vert structure to the polygon, and then if it's two-tiered, they would know they have to provide species and age by layer. Structure isn't such a big deal in the boreal. The polygons with structure in the boreal tend to be really messy and yeah, difficult to split. all of this discussion was from a wood supply perspective. Vertical structure may be also really important, even in the boreal, for things like fire risk, fuel loading, things like wildlife habitat and browse. So I think there's a lot of potential for providing information on layers to some of these perhaps non-timber, non-wood supply uses. We did publish this, again, thanks to Joanne and Murray. It's available. And that's what I've got. So if anybody has any questions, please ask. We, again, thank you for the opportunity to share this work with you.
Well, what fantastic work, Margaret. Thank you for tackling the issue of layering. It is. I always found it quite subjective myself as well, and I'm happy that you're reinforcing that fact. While we're waiting for maybe one question or two to come in, what would be your opinion about adding more layers to try to delve into those more complex forests, such as the Canadian Wabanaki forest or some of that was boreal?
Tons of potential. Like, I think that kernel smoothing, like, it's not limited to 2 modes. Like, you can fit that curve, can have as many bulges as you want. The trick is to try to make sure, like, if 2 nodes are close together, there's a decision made, do you collapse them together? Like, how much separation do you need between those nodes? If there's only a little dip between 2 nodes, do you want to collapse them together as well? And if a node or if a bulge is just really tiny, do you smooth it out? So, but you can have as many of those layers as you want. What can be difficult is the single tree with veterans are the challenge, because there's not that separation that between the layers. There's not a necessarily gap in the LiDAR returns, so that's more of a stair step in the bulge, not 2 distinct bulges, but a bulge merged with another bulge. Not the best statistical terminology there, but that hopefully you get the message. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that was clear. Well, thank you so much for your perspective, and that's all the time we have right now. Oh, there we go. I was wondering if the person wanted to find your publication, but I think they just found it, so that's great. Well, thank you very much for sharing that insight.
Thank you.
And we'll move on now to Brent, who has some other really interesting developments with LiDAR. So whenever you're ready, you can share your screen and.
Perfect. While I get that set up, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Brent Murray. I am a PhD student in the Integrated Remote Sensing Studio at the University of British Columbia, studying under Dr. Nicholas Coops. And my work in particular is looking at estimating tree species composition with LiDAR and deep learning approaches. So, yeah. So obviously, increasing our knowledge about forest attributes, including tree species, is going to help to improve forest management practices in Canada. This is very important for commercial value, as well as habitat, biodiversity, and species at risk. And it's also very important for different cultural practices for many different groups across Canada. So currently, there are some methods for estimating species composition or tree species in particular. So the classic version is using photographic interpretation, and this is typically done to estimate species composition. And then there's also different automated approaches, such as regression and machine learning approaches that will help to estimate species. And this is typically done either in the functional group or in the leading species. So single photon LiDAR or SPL data has been acquired in Ontario to help support this forest resource inventory development, and it's used to estimate a bunch of different forest attributes, as well as things like terrain and elevation, hydrology, and transportation. And like was said before by Ian, the minimum point density for this is around 25 points per meter squared. So modeling species from LiDAR is a very challenging task, as there's not a lot of spectral information within that data set. There is the intensity values, but unfortunately those are not calibrated across the different sensors, and they can portray different aspects of the tree species themselves. Additionally, individual tree extraction can be difficult, and species estimation from this is problematic, as if you have an incorrectly segmented tree, the classification of that is also going to be impacted by that. This is also very challenging in mixed plots, which we see across many of these forested areas. So the question that we're trying to ask is, can advanced computing approaches such as deep learning help to the assessment of species composition at the plot level? And so our objective was to estimate the tree species proportion within a plot using ALS data and existing forest inventory data with adapted point-based deep learning techniques. So this study was undertaken in the Romeo Millet Forest, which is a very large area within the boreal forest region of Ontario. It is associated, or there's a lot of different dominant species that are within this area, and they change across the landscape, as you might expect. And it's also associated with 5 different First Nations, as well as the Métis Nation of Ontario. So the modeling approach that we took here, looking at the point cloud at a plot level, 400 meters squared, we applied our deep learning model to estimate all of the species proportions simultaneously. So it's not like we were segmenting these trees and then estimating the species for each and every single tree species that is in that plot. We took the approach of trying to estimate the composition just from the plot level without having to do any segmentation. So to do that, we used the forest resource inventory that was provided by Green First Forest Products. And to see if this was even possible, we looked at polygons that were large enough in size. So anything that was over 10,000 meters squared, we included that within our analysis. Additionally, to include only species that were more dominant and more prominent throughout the landscape, we had to have these polygons also had to have 20 other polygons that had the same species composition code. This was to allow this model to understand the training, to find the different patterns associated to the point cloud, to estimate these species. And if you had too few species samples within the data set, it just wasn't feasible for this deep learning model to do that. To generate these plots, we created random points within those remaining polygons, at least 50 meters away from the boundary, so we didn't have any edge effects that were associated to that. Additionally, if any of those plots were deemed as disturbed by the National Terrestrial Ecosystem Monitoring System data set, whether that's through fire or harvesting, we removed those as well, just in case the species composition has changed over time through those disturbances. Once we extracted those point clouds from those plots, we height normalized them and then filtered any points that were greater than, or that were below the 2 meter mark, just so that we were only getting the structure of the tree itself and we weren't getting any ground classifications or any sort of low vegetation being impacted by that. We then labeled each of these point clouds with a species composition vector, which in our case was a 9 valued vector associated to each and every single one of the species that were of interest to our study. So in that gray box, as you can see, we had a species composition code, and we converted that into a species composition vector, which we organized in a way that was alphabetical. So that way, each and every single time, the sample had this exact same order. It wasn't based on the dominance, it was based on the alphabetical order. So that way we can estimate the proportions in a consistent manner. We also rounded these species proportions to the nearest 10th value, just to allow this model to be able to train more effectively. Additionally, we downsampled these point clouds to a consistent 7,168 points, and we felt that this number of points kept the overall structure of these plots, but also allowed for a higher estimate compared to some of the lower sampled lower point samples that we chose in initial results. So there were two components to this model. We had an estimator, which was the one that was actually estimating the proportions of this, but we also had an augmenter, which is based off of the generative adversarial network, which augments these point clouds to create synthetic point clouds to increase the number of training samples that we had within this data set. And so that approach, we had two different models to increase the samples, and then one model that was used to estimate these proportions. And then obviously the output is going to be these proportions, and then we're able to bring that back into these species composition codes. So some results from this work, this model was able to achieve an R-squared adjusted of 0.61 and an RMSE of 0.14. And as you can see in this box plot, we have this trend as the actual proportions of the truth values increase, we also had an increase in the estimated proportions. There was a lot of variation within this, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we go through this. Going through into some of the more species level estimates and errors, you can see that there are obviously some species that were able to be predicted better than others. And part of the reason for this is because we're not just trying to estimate only what the species is in that plot, we're trying to estimate the proportions in that. And because these polygons are so massive in area, the species proportions can actually change from location to location, even within that polygon. So the estimates might be a little bit off based on that, but also no model is perfect. When we were to group these into leading species or coniferous and deciduous, when we did that, leading species, we got an overall accuracy of about 0.67%. And then for coniferous and deciduous, we got an overall accuracy of about 85%. It is important to note that we are only using the X, Y, and Z coordinates of the LiDAR data. We're not using any other attributes to estimate this. When we look at these species composition codes, again, as I mentioned before, there could be some variation within these the species composition from location to location. So if we were to look at the number of correct samples that were estimated, if we increase that to plus or minus 10%, we were able to get 77% of these species composition codes to be accurate across the landscape. And then if we increase that to 20% plus or minus 20%, we were able to get up to 89% accuracy within this. As you can see from this image here, we were able to estimate things 100% correct, even without having that plus or minus 10 or 20%. But you can see within the bottom row here that there are some estimates that were incorrectly estimated. And part of the reason for that is that we're switching spots with some of the proportions, whether that is going to be 50 instead of 40% and things like that. So we are able to estimate this, and you can see from those codes that they are fairly close. And again, sometimes things were estimated differently as well. This work was published in the ISPRS Journal of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. So if you are curious about that, more details on this, you can access that journal. And the code is also publicly available to continue estimating these species as well. So some future applications that we're going to be doing with this, and we have the support of the Forestry Future Trusts of Ontario. So some of the things that we are going to be doing is we're going to be transferring these models to different areas in Ontario, and also to include different species that are associated to these different areas. Additionally, we are going to be looking into some more advanced cloud computing options to see if we can increase the speed that these models are being able to be trained and to be tested as well. So some future research that I am going to be undertaking. I am going to be looking at including additional data types into this, whether that be multispectral imagery or if that's going to be phenology data sets as well, because both of those things are going to be important to the identification of particularly deciduous species. Additionally, we might look at things like terrain and climate as well. Another area of research, we're going to try to apply this across the Romeo Millet Forest. Currently, we've only done it at this plot level, and it's not a wall-to-wall estimate. So we're going to try to apply this to the entire of Romeo Millet to see if we can get some maps generated for this. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for the time. And if you have any questions, I'm available.
Well, that's fantastic work, Brent. Congratulations. I'm happy to see that you've already have some nice next steps planned. So we do have a couple questions already. So the first one is for the plot data, species proportion was done by stem or by basal area, and across all layers, or is dead also retained?
Yeah, great question. So the plots that we generated were based on the forest resource inventory data. So that is that code or that volume or the proportion that we're using is from that data set itself. So I believe that's based on basal area. And I don't believe that the dead in our case was included in that because it's at such a large scale. For that, we didn't include the dead in this, in this analysis.
Yeah, maybe a follow-up on that is what would be the influence of this kind of volume, probably wood volume inventory data, and then you're looking at a point cloud and there's an implication about the crown. So do you have anything to say about that? How would it influence your results?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are trying to use a new model that we can use to estimate this. And yes, there's going to be some bias towards that. I think one of the biggest things with this is that we're able to also estimate some of the lower canopy structure that's within this. And we might not be able to get the 100% accuracy on this because we don't have a data set that can do this species estimation. And if we do use field validated plots, unfortunately, there's just not enough samples to train these deep learning models because within my study, I actually used 16,000 randomly generated plots for this. So it's very, very hard to use field validated plots for deep learning approaches, unfortunately.
Okay, well, we'll keep our eyes peeled on options for you.
Yeah.
We have another question here that's asking why downsample the point clouds and was the filter random?
That's a very good question. So I'll answer the second part first. So the filtering was not done randomly. It was done using an algorithm called furthest point sampling, which is a very popular downsampling technique within deep learning, and it helps to retain the structure of that point cloud. And the reason why we downsampled the point clouds for two reasons. One, it's much faster to train these algorithms if we downsample these point clouds from, let's say, 20,000 points to 7,000. The second reason is that it would not fit in the memory of my GPUs if we increase the point samples as well. And we were using some fairly high powered GPUs in this case. But thankfully, once we have these models trained, they are able to run on a CPU or a GPU at a much more efficient rate. But yeah, we had to downsample it in order to fit into the GPUs. We also found that if we increased the point density, we actually had less accuracy associated to that because I think there's just too much noise going on within the point cloud as well.
Okay, well, you might have answered this next question, but what is the reason for downsampling and data augmentation with Gen AI?
Yeah, same reason. Yeah, I don't think there's anything more to add to that.
Okay, perfect. And we have a couple more here for you. What is the best LiDAR derived value to describe individual tree structure that can relate to the tree species?
Good question. That is something that I did not research within this specific publication. The models that we were using were looking at, it kind of takes a kernel within that point cloud and it goes throughout the entire point cloud to estimate the structure within that. That is something that we could potentially do as a future research project, but it wasn't a specific LiDAR derived value. We were specifically just looking at the connections that were made between the points, just like a connect the dots kind of thing within the deep learning algorithm. And then it looks at the angles within that structure of those connections to make the estimation. So it wasn't really a LiDAR derived value per se.
Yeah, hence the amount of computing power you're needing, eh?
Yes, exactly.
All right, so and then a final question here for you. What tools or software did you use to train the model?
Good question. So I was using a Python package called PyTorch to do this. Again, all of the code and the pre-trained models are actually available on that GitHub that is listed in the publication. So if you are curious about that, that is publicly available to anybody who's interested.
Well, I love it when people share their code and their insights. And on that note, we'll look for some training data sets for you and
Thank you.
send them your way. Because yeah, it can be a daunting task, and it is the most costly part of it, and the part that people don't necessarily want to do. Yeah, so thank you very much for your presentation, Brent. And this wraps up our cross-country checkup. Huge thanks to all of our presenters for all the work and sharing their knowledge, and to all of the participants for joining us. Without you, this would not be an event without your interest. Please take a second or two to, if we can put up that survey, Sharon. Please take 10 seconds to fill out our poll to see where you're coming from and if you found this valuable or not. We really appreciate your feedback, and yeah, thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.